Imagine being sold into slavery by your own brothers, wrongfully imprisoned, and yet rising to become the most powerful person in a nation. How does someone endure such betrayal and still find purpose? This isn't just an ancient tale, it's a profound journey of resilience, faith, and ultimately incredible triumph. Prepare to be captivated by the full, unfiltered story of Joseph, a narrative so profound it will forever change how you view hardship and destiny. Hello, my beloved friends. I am so happy that you are here with me tonight. Before we begin, I would love to know where you are listening from. You can share it in the comments. It is always such a joy to see how many wonderful people from all around the world are gathered together to listen to these calming stories from the Word of God. If you enjoy these peaceful Bible stories, I kindly invite you to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who might need a moment of peace tonight. Your support means so much, and it helps us continue creating these soothing stories for you. Now, let us begin our gentle journey into the life of Joseph. This story is one of hope, faith, and the mysterious ways in which God works through every season of life. We will start at the very beginning, in the quiet hills of Canaan, where Joseph's story first blooms like a tender flower touched by the morning sunday. The land of Canaan was calm in those days. The fields stretched wide and open beneath the endless sky, and the soft winds carried the scent of wild grasses across the valleys. In this peaceful setting lived a man named Jacob. He was the son of Isaac and the grandson of Abraham, and his household was large and blessed. Jacob had many sons, 12 in all, and among them was Joseph, a young man whose life would be filled with wonders and trials that no one could have imagined. Joseph was still a teenager when our story begins, only 17 years old, and he carried a brightness in his spirit that made him different from the rest. His eyes were full of light, and there was a gentleness in his voice, as if he carried within him a melody that the world could not silence. He walked with a certain grace, and when he smiled, it seemed to warm the hearts of those around him. Jacob loved Joseph more than any of his other sons. This love was deep and tender because Joseph was the firstborn son of Rachel, the woman Jacob had loved with all his heart. For many years Jacob had longed for children with Rachel, and when Joseph was finally born, it felt to Jacob like a gift straight from heaven. He cherished him dearly, and everyone in the family knew it. To show this special love, Jacob made Joseph a beautiful coat. It was not like any ordinary garment. It was long and flowing, woven with threads of many colors, bright and vivid like a rainbow after a gentle rain. When the sun touched its fabric, it glimmered with shades of crimson and gold, sapphire and emerald, as if it carried the very light of the morning sky. When Joseph wore it, he looked like someone set apart for something greater, though he himself did not yet understand the full meaning of it. But not everyone looked at Joseph with joy. His brothers saw the way their father loved him above the rest, and slowly their hearts began to fill with envy. At first, it was only a small shadow, like a cloud drifting across a bright sky, but over time it grew heavier. They watched him walking in the fields in that splendid coat, and they felt a sting in their hearts. They spoke among themselves in low voices, their words carrying a bitterness they could not hide. Joseph, however, was innocent of their thoughts. his heart was pure, and his spirit was untroubled. He was not boastful or proud, for he did not see himself as greater than his brothers. He simply lived each day with the same calm faith that had always guided him. He would rise early in the morning, helping in the fields and tending the flocks with steady hands. The skies of Canaan stretched wide above him, and the sound of sheep bells mingled with the rustle of the breeze through the grasses. But Joseph had something else that set him apart. He was a dreamer. His nights were not like those of other men. When he slept, his mind wandered into visions filled with meaning, dreams that spoke in symbols of things yet to come. These dreams were not ordinary. They were like gentle whispers from heaven, carrying messages that even Joseph did not fully understand. One evening, as the stars began to appear like silver lanterns in the darkening sky, Joseph shared one of these dreams with his brothers. They were sitting together after the day's work, the glow of the sunset fading into deep shades of rose and violet across the horizon. Joseph's voice was calm and sincere as he spoke. "Listen to the dream I had," he said softly. "We were out in the field, binding sheaves of grain. Suddenly, my sheaf rose and stood upright, and your sheaves gathered around mine and bowed down to it." His brothers looked at him, and their faces darkened like a storm passing over the Sunday. They understood the meaning at once, and it stirred their anger. "Do you really think you will rule over us?" they asked. Their words were sharp, like thorns hidden beneath the grass. Joseph was quiet. He had not spoken to boast, only to share what he had seen. The dream lingered in his mind like the fading glow of the evening sky, and he could not keep it to himself. Soon, another dream came to him, even more striking than the first. In this dream, the sun, the moon, and 11 stars bowed down to him. When he told his family, his father rebuked him gently, though he pondered the meaning in his heart. "Will your mother and I and your brothers truly come and bow before you?" Jacob asked. His tone was calm, but inside he wondered what God might be saying through these visions. For Joseph, these dreams were like seeds planted deep within the soil of his soul. They were quiet, yet full of life, waiting for the time when they would rise and bear fruit. But for his brothers, the dreams were like sparks falling on dry grass, igniting a fire of jealousy that would soon grow beyond their control. The days continued peacefully on the surface. The sun rose each morning in soft gold, the hills spread wide in calm beauty, and the sheep grazed quietly in the pastures. Yet beneath that calm sky, a storm was slowly gathering, unseen by Joseph, whose heart remained pure and full of wonder. And so, in the land of Canaan, in the gentle hush of the early dawn and the glowing warmth of evening light, the first chapters of Joseph's story began to unfold. He was a young man clothed in a coat of many colors, cherished by his father, and blessed with dreams that spoke of a future far beyond anything he could imagine. These were the dreams that would carry him through valleys of sorrow and mountains of hope. But for now, he was only a boy beneath the wide sky, with the laughter of youth still in his voice, unaware of the road that lay before him. The days in Canaan rolled on with a rhythm as gentle as the passing breeze. Yet within Jacob's household, quiet tensions began to grow. It was a home blessed with abundance, where the flocks grazed across the hills and the fields yielded their grain. But no earthly abundance could silence the murmurs of envy that stirred among the sons of Jacob. Joseph, the young dreamer, walked through those sunlit fields with a light heart, never suspecting the depth of feeling his presence awakened in his brothers. Each step he took seemed innocent, his thoughts wandering toward the mysteries of his dreams and the simple joys of tending sheep beneath the wide sky. But behind him, unseen, resentment trailed like a long shadow, growing darker with every passing day. At the center of this silent storm was a single garment, the coat that Jacob had given to Joseph. It was more than fabric and thread. It was more than the bright colors that shimmered in the morning sunday. This coat carried meaning, a message that could not be hidden, a sign of love and favor that set Joseph apart from his brothers like a star standing alone in the night sky. When Jacob first gave the coat to Joseph, it was an act of devotion, an expression of the deep bond between father and son. Jacob had loved Rachel with all the strength of his heart, and Joseph, being her firstborn, carried that love like a crown. The coat was long and flowing, finely made, a garment that spoke of dignity and honor. Its colors were many, each hue woven with care, crimson like the ripened fruit, sapphire like the deep sky at twilight, gold like the morning sun as it touched the hills. When Joseph first wore it, the household seemed to pause for a moment, as if even the walls and the fields had drawn in a quiet breath. He stood there, his eyes bright with gratitude, his young face calm and unassuming, yet there was no mistaking what this gift meant. It was a sign that he was beloved above all others. For Joseph, the coat was a treasure, not because it lifted him above his brothers in his own eyes, but because it was a gift from his father, a symbol of his love. He wore it gladly, the way a child clings to something precious given by the hands of a parent. But for his brothers, the coat burned in their sight. Each time they looked at it, a bitterness rose within them, like a slow fire consuming dry wood. They watched him as he walked through the fields, the colors of the coat catching the sunlight, gleaming like jewels against the green of the grass. Each gleam seemed to whisper a cruel reminder. He is loved more than you. He is chosen. He is set apart. At first, they tried to swallow their resentment, but it pressed on their hearts like a heavy stone. They spoke little when Joseph was near, but when he was gone, their voices turned sharp and low. They questioned why their father would do this, why he would so openly favor one son above the rest. The old wounds of comparison deepened into something darker, something dangerous. Joseph did not notice these things. His heart was free of malice, and his thoughts were filled with the simple beauty of life in Canaan, the soft song of doves in the morning, the golden fields waving under the warm sun, the laughter of children in the distant tents. He rose early each day, walking through the quiet valleys, his steps light upon the earth, his spirit untouched by the gathering storm. Yet the coat remained, bright as a flame against the shadows of his brothers' hearts. Each time Joseph drew it around his shoulders, their anger tightened like a knot. They began to speak openly among themselves, their words like stones cast into deep waters. "Look at him," one brother would say, his voice heavy with scorn. Does he think he is a prince among us? Another would answer, Our Father has set him above us all. That coat speaks louder than words. And another, his voice edged with bitterness, would murmur, Let him dream his dreams. Let him wear his colours. We will see what becomes of them. They remembered the dreams Joseph had told them, the sheaves bowing, the stars and the sun, and the moon bending low, and the memory stung like salt upon an open wound. The dreams had already planted suspicion in their hearts, and the coat gave those suspicions roots that grew deep and unyielding. Day after day, the sight of Joseph in that coat became unbearable. It followed them like an echo, a constant reminder that they were not the favoured ones. And so, resentment turned to hatred, slow and silent at first, then swelling like a river after a storm. Jacob, in his deep love for Joseph, seemed blind to the currents swirling beneath the surface. He looked upon his son with pride, his heart warmed by the sight of him in that splendid garment. When Joseph approached, Jacob's eyes would soften, and he would speak to him with a gentleness that the others longed for but rarely received. The fields of Canaan lay peaceful under the sun, the hills rolling in quiet majesty, the flocks grazing without care. Yet within the tents of Jacob, a darker season had begun. It was not a storm that broke the sky with thunder, but one that brewed in secret, in the hearts of men who could no longer bear the weight of envy. And still, Joseph walked among them, unaware of the danger that ripened with each passing day. His steps were steady, his voice calm, his eyes filled with the same innocent light. The coat, with all its colours, flowed about him as he moved through the tall grasses, its hues glowing like the blossoms of a distant garden. It seemed to carry a promise, though Joseph did not yet know what that promise meant, nor how dearly it would cost him. As the days stretched on, the distance between Joseph and his brothers grew wider, though no word was spoken to bridge it. They could not look upon him without feeling the sharp edge of anger. They avoided his gaze, and when he spoke, their answers were brief, their tones hard. Yet Joseph, in his youth, did not see these things clearly. His heart was too pure, too untroubled to read the shadows gathering in their eyes. He still shared his thoughts freely, still walked with an openness that seemed almost like sunlight falling upon dark waters. And so the coat remained, a garment of beauty and love, yet also a banner that marked Joseph as different, as chosen, as the one who stood apart. It was a symbol of favour, but to his brothers it became a symbol of everything they believed had been denied to them. The story of Joseph's life was unfolding quietly, like a scroll unrolled by unseen hands. Every thread of that coat was a thread in the tapestry of his destiny. It would bring him sorrow and trial, yet it would also lead him to honour beyond anything he could have imagined. For now, it was only a coat, bright against the green hills, stirring envy in the hearts of those who saw it. But soon, its colours would be stained by the dust of the wilderness, and the tears of a boy who had not yet learned the depth of human hatred. The sun sank lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the fields where the brothers tended their flocks. In that quiet light, the resentment that had begun as a whisper now stood like a silent figure among them, waiting, watching, patient for the moment when it would take its shape in action. And Joseph, the dreamer, walked on beneath the golden evening sky, his coat flowing behind him like a banner of many colors, bright against the dark path that lay ahead. The quiet days continued, and the hills of Canaan glowed softly under the morning light as the flocks moved like white clouds across the fields. Jacob's household lived in the rhythm of work and rest, the sounds of voices rising gently in the open air. Yet beneath that calm surface, the unease among Joseph's brothers had deepened. They no longer saw the coat as a simple garment. It had become a silent declaration of Joseph's place in their father's heart. But there was something more that would add weight to their bitterness, something Joseph himself could not have foreseen. It came in the stillness of night, in the secret world of dreams, where visions often spoke more than the tongue could ever tell. Joseph's dreams were unlike those of other men. They did not drift away like smoke in the morning wind. They lingered, vivid and bright, as though painted upon his soul. The first came on a night when the stars shone like countless lamps across the velvet sky, their lights spilling softly over the tents of Jacob's household. Joseph lay in quiet sleep, the air cool and still, the earth breathing its slow rhythm beneath the cover of night. In his dream, he was standing in an open field beneath the same great sky, the ground warm beneath his feet, and the sun casting its golden light upon the ripened grain. Around him were his brothers, strong and sure, their hands busy as they worked with the harvest. Each one was binding sheaves, gathering the stalks and tying them with skill born of long practice. Joseph too was binding his sheaf, the sound of the stalks brushing against one another like whispers in the breeze. Then something strange began to happen. Joseph's sheaf, the one he had bound with his own hands, slowly rose from the earth. It stood upright, firm and tall, as though held by an unseen hand. And around it, the sheaves of his brothers began to move. One by one, they circled his sheaf, bowing low until they bent toward the ground before it. The sight was so vivid, so real, that Joseph felt his breath catch even within the dream. The air seemed charged with meaning, as if the heavens themselves were speaking in silent words. Then the vision faded, and Joseph awoke in the quiet of the night. He lay still for a long time, his heart beating slowly, his mind tracing the image again and again. He could see it so clearly, the sheaves bowing, the earth still beneath them, the sky watching in its endless calm. It stirred something deep within him, not pride, but wonder, a sense that God was weaving something beyond his understanding. When the morning came, the household stirred to life. The soft grey light of dawn touched the tents, and the fields lay veiled in mist like a sleeping sea. Joseph moved among his brothers with his usual gentleness, yet his thoughts were filled with the dream. It was too heavy to keep within his heart. He felt a need to share it, not to boast, but because it seemed to carry a message that could not remain silent. So, as they rested after their work, sitting together where the earth was warm beneath the sun, Joseph spoke. His voice was calm, almost hesitant, as he looked upon his brothers' faces. "Listen," he said softly, "to the dream I had." They turned toward him, their eyes shadowed, their hearts already burdened by the sight of his coat, which lay across his shoulders in its flowing beauty. Their silence pressed upon him, but he continued, for the dream burned within him like a flame. "We were binding sheaves in the field," Joseph said, his tone quiet, almost like a whisper carried by the wind. "And my sheaf rose and stood upright, while your sheaves gathered around it and bowed down to it. For a moment there was only the sound of the breeze moving through the grass, the distant murmur of sheep on the hills. Then their voices came, hard and sharp, cutting through the stillness like a blade. 'Do you intend to reign over us?' one of them said, his words heavy with scorn. 'Do you think you will truly rule us?' Another added, his voice low but trembling with anger. Their eyes burned with a light Joseph had never seen before. The bitterness that had lingered like smoke now flared into flame. The coat had set him apart, but this dream seemed to lift him even higher, to a place they could not bear to imagine. Joseph sat in silence, his heart steady, though the weight of their anger pressed upon him. He had not spoken to wound them. He had only spoken the truth of what he had seen. Yet his words, innocent as they were, fell upon hearts already hardened by envy, and each syllable seemed to deepen their resentment. But the dreams did not end there. Another came, bright and full of mystery, like a star breaking through the darkness of night. This time, Joseph saw the heavens above him, vast and infinite, the stars burning with their silent light. In his dream, the sun and the moon were there, shining with their gentle glow, and around them were 11 stars, bright as jewels scattered across the sky. And in this vision, the sun, the moon, and the 11 stars bowed low before him. Joseph awoke once more, the image blazing in his mind, more radiant even than the first. He could feel the meaning pulsing like a hidden river, though he could not yet trace its path. It was not mere fancy. It was a message, a whisper from the eternal, speaking of something yet to come. And so, when the moment came, Joseph shared this dream as well. His voice was clear, his face calm, though a shadow of unease touched the air around them. "I had another dream," he said, and the words fell softly like dew upon the earth. This time, the sun and the moon and 11 stars bowed down to me. The brothers stared at him, their faces hard as stone. Their anger surged like a flood breaking its banks, and in their hearts a silent oath began to take shape, a promise that these dreams would never come to pass. Even Jacob, hearing the dream, rebuked Joseph, though his words were gentler than those of the brothers. "What is this dream you had?" he asked, his voice deep with thought. "Shall I and your mother and your brothers indeed come and bow down to the earth before you?" Yet even as he spoke, Jacob pondered these things in his heart. He remembered the God who had appeared to him in visions, the God who had spoken in the night, the God who had guided his steps through every trial. And though he rebuked Joseph with his lips, his soul held the dream close, turning it over like a hidden treasure. The brothers, however, did not ponder. They hated Joseph all the more for his dreams and for his words. Their hearts were now fields of thorn, and no rain of kindness could soften them. Every glance they cast upon him was heavy with malice. Every word they spoke behind his back was steeped in bitterness. And still, the dreams lingered, shimmering like distant lights in the darkness. They were not born of pride. They were not woven from the threads of earthly ambition. They were seeds of prophecy, planted by the hand of God, seeds that would one day bloom in ways no man could foresee. But for now, they lay hidden, buried beneath the soil of envy and the weight of unspoken wrath. The sun rose each morning, casting its golden light across the fields, and the flocks moved in their gentle rhythm. Yet within the hearts of the brothers a storm raged, silent and fierce, waiting for the hour when it would break upon the dreamer who walked among them, still wrapped in his coat of many colours, still innocent of the shadows gathering at his side. The days after Joseph shared, his dreams were filled with a quiet tension that stretched through the household like a rope pulled tight. Though the sun rose each morning in soft gold, and the flocks grazed as if nothing had changed, the air among Jacob's sons had grown heavy with unspoken thoughts. The bitterness that had begun as a flicker now smouldered like a hidden fire, ready to burst forth. Each glance Joseph received from his brothers carried a weight he could not yet perceive, and each moment of quiet conversation behind his back fanned the flames of envy and anger. It was during this time that Jacob entrusted Joseph with a task that seemed simple, yet would become the turning point in his young life. The flocks had moved to greener pastures, and Jacob asked Joseph to take a message to his brothers, to check on their welfare and see how the sheep were faring. The journey would take him across the hills, through fields rich with grasses, and along narrow paths lined with stones smoothed by the passage of many feet. Joseph, obedient and kind, agreed without hesitation, unaware of the danger that awaited him. He rose early that morning, the soft light of dawn brushing the hills with hues of pink and gold. The air was cool, and a gentle wind stirred through the olive trees that dotted the slopes. He wrapped himself in his flowing coat, the long fabric brushing against his legs as he moved. Each step he took was light and purposeful, his heart steady with faith, yet unaware of the storm gathering in the hearts of those who were meant to be his protectors, his brothers. The brothers had set out earlier that day, tending to the flocks in a valley near the town of Dothan. Their faces were hardened by resentment, their movements deliberate, as though each step might carry them closer to a plan they had begun to weave. When they saw Joseph approaching from the distance, his coat glimmering in the morning sun, a tense silence fell over the group. The sight of him, so innocent and so favoured, stoked the embers of anger that had grown too long in the shadows. "Here comes the dreamer," one brother muttered, his voice low and sharp. "He comes with his father's messages, but the dreams are in his mouth, and they poison us even more." Another brother's eyes narrowed, and he spat upon the ground as if to cast away the thought of Joseph's visions. "This is the moment," he said quietly, though the words carried the weight of malice. "We cannot allow him to think he will rise above us." The tension among them was so thick that the birds flying overhead seemed to pause, as if sensing the gathering storm. And yet Joseph continued, unaware, stepping lightly over the rocky ground, greeting them with a smile and a gentle word, asking after the sheep and the pastures, sharing stories of the fields he had crossed on his way. His innocence, however, did little to soothe the bitterness that had taken root like deep twisting roots in their hearts. As they walked together across the hills, the conversation turned slowly, inevitably, toward Joseph himself. The brothers' voices grew colder, sharper, the soft tones of the morning replaced with a harshness that grated against the quiet beauty of the land. "Look at him," one said, glancing at Joseph's coat. "Does he think he is greater than all of us? Does he not know that our Father's love is not meant to make one son above the others?" "Perhaps not," another replied. "But his dreams, they speak of power, of us bowing before him. How long shall we bear this mockery?" Joseph, sensing unease but not fully understanding its depth, tried to reassure them, his words soft as the morning wind. "I only share what I have seen," he said calmly. "I mean no harm, and I do not wish to be above any of you. The dreams are a mystery, and I am only their messenger, not their master." But his brothers heard not the innocence in his words, but the truth that stung them most sharply. He believed himself chosen, and in that belief they saw a threat to their place in the household, to the love of their father, to the honor they believed belonged to them by birthright. It was then that the plan began to form, subtle at first, like a whisper in the shadows. One brother, older and more calculating, suggested that they take action, that they seize the boy and remove him from their sight. Another, carried along by the heat of anger, spoke of ending his life, and yet another, tempered by a flicker of conscience, proposed a compromise, a plan that would remove Joseph from the immediate danger of their wrath but not stain their hands with murder. As the sun climbed higher, painting the fields with golden light, they lured Joseph further into the valley. The gentle hills became steeper, the grasses taller, and the path narrower. Birds scattered into the sky, startled by the movement below, and the flocks stirred as though sensing the tension in the air. Joseph, trusting and unaware, walked alongside them, sharing his thoughts about the flocks and the land, completely unknowing of the plan unfolding around him. Suddenly, the older brothers seized him, lifting him off the ground with a strength born of anger and fear. Joseph's voice rose in surprise and confusion, calling for mercy and questioning the actions of those who had grown up with him. His brothers, however, were resolute, their hearts hardened by months of envy, their eyes clouded by the long shadow of jealousy. They cast him into a dry, deep pit, one carved by the weather over time, its walls steep and rough, its bottom dusty and cold. Joseph fell to the ground with a soft thud, the echo of the pit carrying his cries upward. He struggled against the bonds of betrayal, but the pit was deep, and the hands of his brothers were relentless. For a moment, the valley seemed to hold its breath, the sun casting long shadows across the land, the air heavy with the weight of this single, fateful act. From the top of the pit, the brothers stood in a tense silence. Their eyes avoided one another, each wrestling with the choices that had brought them here. And then, in a calculated gesture, they removed Joseph from the pit once more, this time with a plan that would carry him far from Canaan entirely. A caravan of merchants was passing through the region, and the brothers, their hearts a mixture of fear and cunning, sold Joseph into the hands of Ishmaelite traders. The price they received was small, yet the act was irreversible, setting into motion the journey that would take Joseph far from the home he had known. Joseph's mind raced as he was lifted and bound for the journey ahead. Confusion and sorrow mixed within him, yet there was also a quiet strength in his spirit. Even in the face of betrayal, he did not curse the land, nor did he harbor malice in his heart. The quiet faith that had always guided him remained, though the road ahead was unknown and shrouded in shadows. As the caravan moved, the landscape of Canaan faded behind him. The hills that had been familiar and welcoming became distant, rolling into the horizon like memories that belonged to another life. Joseph looked toward the sky, the sun now high and warm, and he felt a strange mixture of grief and wonder. Though his brother's hands had caused this descent, he sensed that something greater was at work, a plan beyond the understanding of men. The journey to Egypt, to the lands of strangers and distant kings, would be long and arduous. The merchants spoke little, their animals moving steadily through the sun-baked paths, and Joseph walked among them with a quiet dignity. The dust rose beneath their feet, settling upon his clothes and darkening the vibrant colours of his coat. Yet even as the bright threads dulled under the journey's strain, they remained a reminder of his father's love, a symbol of the life he had known and the faith that had guided him through his earliest days. Along the way, the travellers passed through valleys and deserts, across rivers and plains, through villages that were new and strange. Joseph observed all with calm attention, noting the rhythms of life in distant lands, the sounds of foreign tongues, the patterns of trade and work. Though his heart ached for the home he had lost, he moved forward with a steady step, guided by a faith that did not falter even in the face of betrayal. Meanwhile, back in Canaan, the brothers returned home, their hearts heavy yet conflicted. They told their father a story of Joseph's disappearance, carefully omitting the truth of their actions, and Jacob's grief was profound. He wept for his beloved son, covering himself in sorrow that seemed to stretch endlessly through the quiet nights. Yet even in his sorrow, there was a quiet hope, a subtle whisper in his soul that the Lord's hand was at work, though its full purpose remained hidden. Joseph's descent into bondage was complete, yet it was not the end of the story. The journey to Dothan, the pit, and the caravan of traders were but the first steps in a path that would lead to greatness and to the fulfillment of the dreams he had seen. Each trial, each hardship, was a thread in the tapestry of his life, weaving together experiences of betrayal and faith, sorrow and hope, loss and eventual restoration. The hills and valleys of Canaan faded behind him, but Joseph's spirit remained unbroken. His heart, though heavy with sorrow, carried a quiet light, a faith that would guide him through the days ahead. He would face trials in Egypt, in the house of Potiphar, and later in the prison cells of the land. Yet through each challenge, the lessons of patience, faith, and integrity would shape him into the man God intended him to become. As the caravan moved steadily through the sun-drenched paths, Joseph walked among the traders with quiet dignity. He observed the people and the customs of lands far from his home, learning their ways and their speech. The journey, though difficult, was also a time of preparation, a period in which his character was being formed in ways unseen, in ways that would later allow him to rise to prominence in Egypt and fulfill the visions of his youth. The descent into betrayal and bondage was harsh, Yet it was also the beginning of Joseph's journey toward the destiny foretold in his dreams. Each step taken, each hardship endured, was a step toward a purpose far greater than he could have imagined. A purpose that would eventually bring not only his own redemption, but also the salvation of many in a time of famine. The sun climbed high over the hills of Canaan, as Joseph's brothers stood over the pit in which they had confined him. The earth around the pit was dry and warm, the stones sunlit and rough beneath their feet. Yet despite the brightness of the day, a shadow lay upon their hearts. The silence of the moment was heavy, broken only by the whisper of wind through the tall grasses and the soft braying of sheep in the distance. Joseph looked up from the pit, his young face calm, though confusion and sorrow were etched lightly in the folds of his brow. He had trusted his brothers, had walked with them across the hills without fear, and now he found himself in a place of despair. The pit was deep, carved over time by rain and wind, and though its walls were rough, it was not cruelly constructed. It was simply a holding place, a separation between him and the home he had known so well. His brothers circled the edge of the pit, their faces a mixture of uncertainty and resolve. Though the fire of envy had carried them to this moment, the reality of their actions pressed upon them in ways they had not anticipated. And yet, the plan they had conceived was already in motion, and there was no turning back. The eldest among them spoke first, his voice low and deliberate. "We cannot leave him here forever. Our father will find him, and the truth will come to light. But he cannot remain with us, as he has been. There must be a way to remove him completely." Another, less cautious, but equally consumed by jealousy, replied, "Then we must sell him. There are traders passing to Egypt this very day. They seek slaves, and we can send him far from Canaan. Let him be gone, and the dreams will trouble us no more." Joseph listened, and though fear stirred in his heart, he did not respond with anger. He remained calm, his spirit tempered by the quiet strength that had always guided him. Even in the face of such profound betrayal, he felt no need to curse those who had caused him harm. His thoughts were already turning toward the hand of God, though he did not yet understand how this act would serve a purpose greater than the pain of the moment. Soon, the caravan of Ishmaelite merchants appeared over the hill, their camels moving steadily along the dusty paths, the soft clatter of their footsteps blending with the rustle of the grasses. Joseph's brothers saw their opportunity and approached the traders, their voices raised in negotiation. They spoke of a young man travelling alone, a handsome and capable youth who would be a valuable addition to their caravan. The merchants, accustomed to such transactions, examined Joseph briefly. They saw a boy of strong spirit, bright eyes, and steady bearing, and they recognized his worth. Words were exchanged, coins were counted, and a bargain was struck. Joseph's fate was sealed by the weight of silver, by the hands of men who valued trade above family bonds, and by the envy of brothers whose hearts had strayed far from compassion. With gentle hands, guided by necessity rather than cruelty, the traders lifted Joseph from the pit. The walls that had contained him for so many hours now faded behind him as he was placed upon the camels, the soft padding of their backs a stark contrast to the hard ground below. The coat of many colours that had once shone so brightly now bore the dust of the journey, dulled but not diminished, a silent reminder of the Father's love that had set him apart from the beginning. As the caravan began its long journey to Egypt, Joseph looked back at the hills of Canaan, the valleys and pastures that had been his home. The sun hung high in the sky, warm upon his shoulders, and the breeze carried the faint scent of olive trees and ripening grain. His heart ached with the loss of home, with the betrayal of those he had loved and trusted. Yet even in that sorrow, there was a quiet acceptance, a calm understanding that the road ahead was not merely a path of punishment or despair, but a journey that would shape him, strengthen him, and prepare him for the greater calling that awaited him. The brothers returned home after the transaction, their hearts heavy with conflicting emotions. Some felt relief, believing they had removed the source of their envy. Others wrestled with guilt, a quiet, gnawing ache that came unbidden during the still hours of the evening. When they told Jacob the story, they spoke carefully, hiding the truth behind their carefully chosen words. They presented Joseph as lost, taken by wild animals or swept away by accident, and Jacob's heart broke with grief. He mourned deeply for his beloved son, covering his days with sorrow and tears. Yet still he trusted in God, even as the weight of loss pressed upon him. For Joseph, the journey to Egypt was long and filled with the unfamiliar. The sun rose and fell upon the desert plains, casting golden light over stretches of sand and stone. The merchants moved with steady pace, their camels plodding along the paths worn smooth by countless travellers. Joseph observed the lands he passed, the villages and the people, the patterns of work and the rhythms of life in a foreign land. Though he missed the hills and pastures of home, he absorbed the world around him with quiet curiosity, learning the ways of trade, the languages of distant people, and the customs that would later serve him well in the place where he would eventually rise to prominence. At night, as the campfires glowed softly and the stars appeared one by one across the vast sky, Joseph would lie upon the earth, the soft hum of camels and the gentle crackle of flames around him. He would think of his family, of his father Jacob, and of the dreams that had first stirred within him in the quiet fields of Canaan. Though the darkness pressed in, there was no despair in his heart. There was only a calm resolve, a trust in God that no betrayal could destroy. He knew not the full measure of the trials ahead, but he sensed that even in this descent into bondage, there was purpose, there was direction, and there was hope. As the caravan approached the land of Egypt, the landscape shifted gradually. The rocky hills of Canaan gave way to wider plains. The Nile's distant waters glimmered like a ribbon of light, and the air carried the scent of fertile soil and crops. The merchants spoke among themselves of markets and buyers, of goods to trade and profits to be gained, and Joseph listened with quiet attention. Every word, every gesture was absorbed and remembered. Though he was still young, his mind was already learning the subtleties of human behavior, of negotiation, of patience and observation. The act of betrayal, profound as it was, became a defining moment in Joseph's life. It taught him that the world could be harsh, that human hearts were capable of both cruelty and greed. Yet it also revealed the quiet strength of character that would carry him through the trials to come. The hands of his brothers had caused suffering, but they had also placed him on a path that would ultimately fulfill the visions he had shared in dreams, the dreams that had seemed to mock him, but were now slowly taking shape in the hidden folds of destiny. During the journey, Joseph's reflections were gentle and steady. He thought not of revenge, but of understanding, of learning, and of trusting in the invisible hand guiding the course of events. Every step upon the dusty roads, every sunrise and sunset, seemed to carry a quiet lesson, a preparation for the greater responsibilities that awaited him in the house of Potiphar, and later within the courts of Egypt itself. The merchants treated him with the practicality of commerce, yet there was respect in their observation of his calm demeanor and intelligence. Joseph adapted quickly, not with arrogance but with humility, observing, learning, and preparing for the life that had been set before him. He tended to their animals, assisted with the trade goods, and spoke when necessary, his voice soft and deliberate, always careful, always measured. Even in slavery, he carried a dignity that distinguished him, a quiet light that would not be dimmed by circumstance or betrayal. And so, the descent into bondage, though cruel and painful, became a journey of growth and transformation. Joseph's heart, though tested, remained unbroken. The betrayal of his brothers, the loss of home, and the crossing into foreign lands were steps upon a path that God had ordained. Each hardship, each moment of uncertainty, was shaping him for a role that would bring provision, reconciliation, and blessing not only for himself, but for many generations to come. The caravan wound its way through the lands beyond Canaan, crossing hills and plains bathed in sunlight, the heat rising gently from the dust beneath the feet of camels. Joseph sat among the travellers, his posture calm, his mind absorbing the unfamiliar world around him. Every gesture of the merchants, every sound and sight of distant villages, every stretch of the road unrolled like a tapestry of new experiences before him. The air was dry and carried the scent of earth and sand, mingled with the faint aroma of spices and traded goods that the merchants transported. The journey was long, each day bringing them closer to Egypt, a land Joseph had never known, but which his heart somehow recognized as part of the path he must walk. Though young, he moved with a careful attentiveness, observing the habits and customs of the people he encountered along the way. He learned the cadence of their speech, the rhythm of their work, and the subtle signs of trust and mistrust that passed between strangers. Even in the shadow of betrayal, his spirit remained steady, shaped by the quiet strength he had cultivated in the pastures of Canaan. When the borders of Egypt came into view, the air shifted. The soil was darker, rich, and fertile from the life-giving waters of the Nile. Palms and date trees lined the river banks, and fields of grain stretched to the horizon, golden in the sun's embrace. The villages were different, the houses built of mud bricks baked in the sunlight, and the people clothed in linen, their faces marked by the labor of sun and wind. Joseph observed it all, his heart open, his mind quietly mapping the patterns of this new world, understanding that he had entered a place where his life would be shaped in ways both challenging and profound. The merchants led him to one of the great cities, bustling with the movement of traders, farmers, and officials. The streets were filled with the sounds of conversation in a tongue that was foreign to his ears, the calls of merchants selling their goods, and the gentle clatter of animals carrying loads of grain, linen, and clay pots. Joseph's steps were careful and measured, his eyes taking in the order and rhythm of the city, its markets and homes, its temples and granaries, each detail a lesson in a world that was new and strange. He was brought to the house of Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh and captain of the guard. The house was large, built of sun-baked bricks with courtyards that opened to the sky, filled with trees and flowers carefully tended. Servants moved about in quiet efficiency, their footsteps soft upon the stone floors, carrying water in jars and baskets of food. Joseph entered this world as a stranger, his heart steady, his mind attentive, ready to learn and to serve with humility. Potiphar looked upon him, noting the youth's calm demeanour, the steadiness in his eyes, the grace with which he carried himself despite his evident status as a new arrival, a slave among the household. He saw a young man with potential, a mind capable of understanding the management of property, and hands capable of diligent work. He entrusted Joseph with responsibilities that might have seemed small to some, but were of great importance in maintaining the order and prosperity of a household as large and active as his. Joseph adapted quickly. Though he was far from home, though he had been betrayed and sold by the very brothers who had shared his youth, he carried a quiet dignity and unwavering dedication in his work. He tended to the household and the fields, managed stores and provisions, and attended to every duty with care. His attention to detail and his integrity began to set him apart, drawing the notice of those who oversaw various parts of the estate. Every task was done not out of compulsion, but out of a quiet resolve to serve faithfully, trusting that even in bondage there was a purpose that would be revealed. The servants of Potiphar began to notice Joseph's reliability and his keen understanding of management. Where there had once been disorder, Joseph brought organization and calm. The animals were fed on time, the granaries were kept in neat order, and the labourers found their work guided by a hand that was firm yet gentle. The house prospered, and even in the small, ordinary tasks of daily life, Joseph's character shone like a light in the quiet corners of the estate. Potiphar, impressed by the young man's skill and honesty, began to entrust Joseph with ever greater responsibilities. He allowed him to oversee the household, to direct servants and workers, and to manage the provision and storage of goods. Joseph carried these duties with a remarkable combination of humility and intelligence. His mind was alert, noticing everything, remembering each detail, and solving problems with patience and care. Even the foreignness of the language and customs did not deter him. He learned quickly, and his ability to adapt quietly amazed those around him. Yet, life in a foreign land was not without challenges. Joseph was a stranger, an outsider in a house of power, and in a culture that was not his own. The customs, though orderly, were unfamiliar, and he often faced questions about practices he did not fully understand. The people around him sometimes treated him with suspicion, for his youth and his foreign background marked him as different. But Joseph responded not with defensiveness or complaint, but with careful observation, learning, and patience. His diligence and kindness slowly earned him the respect and trust of the household, and even in moments of misunderstanding, he remained calm, guided by the steady principles of integrity he had learned in his youth. The house of Potiphar was filled with movement and activity. Servants carried out their duties with quiet efficiency. Cooks prepared meals in the open courtyards, and guards patrolled the boundaries of the estate. Joseph learned to navigate these routines, to understand the needs of the household, and to anticipate problems before they arose. He became a source of quiet guidance, a steady presence whose calm demeanor inspired trust among those who worked alongside him. In his free moments, Joseph would often walk through the gardens of the estate, observing the growth of plants and the patterns of birds and animals. The beauty of this new land, though different from the hills and pastures of Canaan, offered him a quiet solace. The gardens were places of reflection, where he could consider the journey that had brought him here and the lessons he had learned along the way. Even in exile, he found moments of peace, and in those moments, his heart was lifted by the recognition that his life was unfolding according to a plan larger than the sorrow he had endured. Though he was still young, Joseph began to understand the dynamics of leadership and responsibility. He observed Potiphar's interactions with his officials and servants, learning how authority could be exercised with fairness and wisdom. He noted the importance of integrity, the quiet strength of a steady hand, and the value of trust in maintaining harmony within a household. These lessons, absorbed in the quiet diligence of daily work, would later serve him well in positions of even greater responsibility and influence. As the days turned into weeks, Joseph's reputation within the house grew. The successes he achieved were quiet but undeniable. The management of the estate improved under his care, and Potiphar's confidence in him deepened. Other servants began to seek his guidance, and even those who were initially skeptical of his youth and foreign origin came to respect his calm authority and his fairness. Each task he completed, each decision made with care and integrity, strengthened his position and prepared him for challenges that would come later in his life. Yet amidst all this, Joseph never forgot the family he had left behind. His thoughts often returned to the hills of Canaan, to the flocks and fields, to his father Jacob, and to the brothers whose envy had set him on this path. Though sorrow touched his heart, it was accompanied by a quiet trust that the hand of God was guiding him. Even in the loneliness of a foreign land, he held fast to the faith that the dreams he had been shown in his youth would one day be fulfilled. The arrival in Egypt marked the beginning of a life far removed from the home of his childhood. It was a world of new customs, new language, and new responsibilities. Yet Joseph moved through it with grace, diligence, and a quiet courage that set the stage for all that was to come. Every day, every interaction, every challenge was an opportunity to grow, to learn, and to prepare for the destiny that awaited him. Even in the face of betrayal and exile, Joseph's spirit remained unbroken. The foreign land, the unfamiliar customs, and the weight of slavery did not diminish the strength of his character. He continued to serve faithfully, to observe carefully, and to act with integrity in all things. The journey that had begun with the betrayal of his brothers had led him to a place of opportunity and growth, a place where his gifts and his character could be recognized and nurtured. And so Joseph's life in Egypt began. A life marked by learning, adaptation, and the quiet cultivation of wisdom. Though he was far from the hills of Canaan, his heart carried the lessons of home, the faith of his youth, and the dreams that would one day unfold. Each day, each act of service, each moment of reflection in the house of Potiphar was a step in the journey of a life destined for greatness, a life in which patience, integrity, and trust in God's plan would transform trials into triumphs, sorrow into wisdom, and exile into preparation for a future of profound purpose. Joseph's days in Potiphar's household unfolded like a quiet river, steady and deliberate, carrying him toward a destiny he could not yet fully see. The house was vast, with courtyards and storerooms, kitchens bustling with servants, and animals that needed constant care. Yet Joseph approached every task with diligence and attention, quietly observing the rhythm of life and learning to manage both people and resources with wisdom far beyond his years. From the moment he had been placed in service, Joseph understood that excellence in even the smallest duties could lay the foundation for greater responsibilities. He began with simple tasks, tending to the flocks of the household, caring for the animals with gentle hands, feeding them on schedule, ensuring that their pens were clean and their health maintained. His meticulous care did not go unnoticed. The other servants, many of whom had been part of the household for years, began to watch him closely. They noted the calmness of his demeanor, the careful attention he gave to every detail, and the respect he showed to all members of the household, regardless of their station. Potiphar himself, an officer of Pharaoh and a man of great authority, observed Joseph's work with interest. He saw a young man who carried himself with confidence, yet never arrogance, who obeyed instructions carefully but also thought ahead, anticipating the needs of the house before they were spoken. Joseph's intelligence and integrity set him apart, and Potiphar quickly recognized that this was no ordinary servant. He entrusted Joseph with increasingly important responsibilities, allowing him to oversee portions of the household and manage both laborers and storehouses. With each new task, Joseph's abilities became more evident. He managed the supplies of food, the accounts of trade, and the schedules of workers with remarkable skill. The storerooms, once in disorder, now gleamed with organization. Inventories were kept with precision, and the household began to run with a calm efficiency that reflected Joseph's careful oversight. Even the animals thrived under his attention, producing milk and wool in abundance, while the flocks grew stronger and healthier. Joseph's approach was quiet but powerful. He treated every servant, every worker, with fairness and respect, earning their trust and cooperation. Unlike some who might have demanded obedience through fear, Joseph inspired diligence through example and integrity. His calm presence brought order and harmony to the household, and those who worked under him found both encouragement and accountability. This reputation grew steadily, spreading not only among the servants but also to the wider community, for word traveled quickly of the young man whose diligence and fairness transformed Potiphar's estate into a model of prosperity. Potiphar's confidence in Joseph deepened. He allowed Joseph to manage the household in its entirety, placing in his care all the resources and people within his domain. The responsibility was immense, yet Joseph handled it with remarkable calm and insight. He learned to balance the demands of laborers, the expectations of his master, and the rhythms of daily life, ensuring that every element of the household functioned smoothly. The increase in responsibility did not overwhelm him. Rather, it became an opportunity to grow, to exercise discernment, and to practice the principles of integrity that had been instilled in him from childhood. In all of this, Joseph's faith quietly guided him. He understood that his gifts and his abilities were not solely his own, but tools to be used wisely in service to those around him. Though he had been betrayed by his brothers, sold into a foreign land, and faced the loneliness of exile, he did not allow bitterness to take root in his heart. Instead, he trusted that the hand of God was present in his circumstances, guiding each step of his path and preparing him for the roles he was destined to fulfill. His days were structured with careful diligence. In the mornings, he would oversee the feeding of animals and the preparation of the household for the day. He checked the storehouses, accounted for provisions, and ensured that the tasks of each servant were clear and manageable. The afternoons were spent coordinating labor in the fields, attending to trade matters, and solving problems that arose unexpectedly. Each challenge was met with patience and thoughtful planning. At night, he would reflect quietly on the day, considering what had been learned, what could be improved, and how he could serve with greater wisdom and effectiveness. The harmony Joseph brought to Potiphar's household was evident not only in the efficiency of the estate, but also in the well-being of the people who lived and worked there. Servants moved with confidence, knowing that their efforts were recognized and appreciated. Laborers found guidance and direction, understanding the expectations placed upon them and the fairness with which they would be treated. Even in the presence of challenges, such as disputes among workers or difficulties with trade, Joseph's calm and discerning approach diffused tension and created solutions that were both just and practical. Potiphar began to rely on Joseph for counsel in matters beyond the household. He observed that Joseph had a keen understanding of human nature, the ability to anticipate difficulties before they arose, and a remarkable talent for organizing resources effectively. Joseph's reputation for fairness, diligence, and wisdom spread, and soon he became known not only within the household but also among those who conducted business with Potiphar, including traders, officials, and other members of the community. Yet Joseph's elevation was not achieved through ambition or self-interest. He remained humble, focused on his work and the trust placed in him, rather than seeking recognition for himself. His integrity became a quiet shield, protecting him from the envy or suspicion that might have arisen in a less disciplined or faithful individual. Even when opportunities to assert dominance or claim personal advantage presented themselves, he acted with restraint, guided by a steady moral compass and a commitment to serve with honesty. The favor he found in Potiphar's eyes was matched by the respect he earned among the servants and workers. They began to look to him for guidance, for fairness, and for leadership. Joseph's calm authority inspired loyalty, and even in moments of difficulty, his presence reassured and guided those around him. He became a figure of stability in a household that encompassed a wide range of people, tasks, and responsibilities, bringing order, efficiency, and quiet prosperity to every aspect of daily life. In the midst of his growing responsibilities, Joseph remained vigilant in his character. He understood that trust must be preserved, that every decision carried consequences, and that the power entrusted to him must be wielded with wisdom and integrity. He observed the workings of Potiphar's household with careful attention, noting how actions and words affected the environment and the people within it. He learned to anticipate challenges, to mediate conflicts, and to cultivate cooperation and harmony, all while maintaining his own personal commitment to honesty and fairness. The story of Joseph's rise in Potiphar's household was not marked by sudden triumphs or dramatic gestures. Instead, it unfolded gradually, like the steady growth of a tree nourished by sunlight and rain. His diligence, integrity, and quiet wisdom became evident over time, and the household prospered as a result. The livestock flourished, the granaries were filled, and the workers carried out their duties with confidence and diligence. Potiphar observed these developments with satisfaction, recognizing that the young man in his care was no ordinary servant, but a talent whose character and abilities had transformed the estate into a model of order and success. Even in the midst of rising responsibility, Joseph did not lose sight of humility. He continued to serve faithfully in every task, whether great or small, understanding that his success was not for personal glory, but to fulfill the duties entrusted to him. His faith remained quiet but steady, a source of strength and guidance that shaped his actions and decisions. Each day became an opportunity to refine his skills, deepen his understanding, and demonstrate the integrity that would later mark him as a man prepared for even greater challenges. The favor Joseph found in Potiphar's eyes and the respect he earned among the servants set the stage for a life in which his talents would be recognized and his character tested. Though he had been betrayed, sold into slavery, and placed in a foreign land, he approached each day with diligence, humility, and trust. The trials he faced became lessons in patience, wisdom, and the quiet power of integrity. In the evenings, after the work of the day was completed, Joseph would walk through the estate, reflecting on the tasks accomplished and the challenges overcome. He observed the fields, the gardens, and the animals, noting improvements and considering ways to enhance the efficiency and harmony of the household. He paid attention to the well-being of the servants, offering guidance and encouragement where needed, and quietly mentoring those who sought his advice. His actions strengthened the bonds of the household, creating a culture of respect, diligence, and mutual support that reflected his careful attention to both people and responsibilities. Joseph's journey in Potiphar's house, though begun in betrayal and bondage, became a story of transformation. Each act of service, each display of integrity, and each moment of wisdom contributed to the rise of a young man whose character was shaped in the crucible of circumstance. His life in Egypt, though far from the hills of Canaan, became a place of preparation where patience, diligence, and faith converged to lay the foundation for the fulfillment of the dreams he had seen as a boy. Even as he managed the complexities of the household, Joseph never lost sight of the greater purpose that guided his life. He understood that his talents, though honed in a house of bondage, were gifts to be used wisely, with care, and in service to others. The respect and trust he earned were not taken for granted, and every decision he made was tempered by a steady moral compass. The rise he experienced was a product not only of his skill, but also of his unwavering commitment to integrity and faithfulness. Joseph's life in Potiphar's house continued to flourish. The household prospered, the workers thrived, and Potiphar's confidence in his young servant deepened. The quiet power of diligence, humility, and faith became evident to all who observed him, setting the stage for challenges yet to come and for the fulfillment of a destiny that had been glimpsed in dreams long before he had left his father's house. Joseph's life in Potiphar's house continued to unfold with diligence, faith, and quiet wisdom. Each day brought new responsibilities, and each task completed reflected his integrity and careful attention. The household prospered under his guidance, and Potiphar's trust in him deepened. Yet even in the midst of success and favor, life introduced a test that would challenge Joseph in a manner entirely different from the responsibilities he had already mastered. Potiphar's wife observed Joseph with growing attention. She noticed his youth, his composure, and the way he moved with confidence and quiet purpose. Though Joseph remained humble and attentive to his duties, she misinterpreted his calm demeanor for something more than simple diligence. Over time, she began to pursue him, offering invitations that went beyond the bounds of propriety and attempting to entice him into actions contrary to his conscience and his faith. Joseph recognized the danger immediately. He understood that yielding to her advances would betray the trust placed in him by Potiphar, violate the principles he had lived by since childhood, and compromise the integrity that had been nurtured within him. He remained firm, responding with careful avoidance and steady resolve. He did not speak harshly or act with anger, but he distanced himself from situations that could compromise his character, and he remained vigilant in his service. Despite Joseph's steadfastness, Potiphar's wife grew more insistent. She attempted to corner him, offering temptations at moments when he was alone in the household, hoping to draw him into wrongdoing. Each time Joseph refused, his heart guided by the quiet but unshakable strength of his faith. He knew that his loyalty to Potiphar and his adherence to moral principles were worth more than fleeting comfort or personal safety. Each refusal required courage, yet he met the challenge with calm resolve, aware that his actions were a reflection not only of his character, but also of the unseen guidance of God in his life. One day, when Joseph was attending to routine tasks in the household, Potiphar's wife attempted once more to entice him. She confronted him, pressing her advances with an intensity that left little room for escape. Joseph, steadfast as ever, fled the situation, leaving behind his garment in her hands. His actions were clear and decisive. He did not hesitate or falter. He chose integrity over convenience, conscience over comfort, and faithfulness over fear. Yet the consequence of this moral decision was not immediate relief, but profound injustice. Potiphar's wife, angered and humiliated by Joseph's refusal, chose to frame him. She took his garment and accused him of attempting wrong against her, fabricating a story that painted Joseph as guilty of a crime he had not committed. Her words were persuasive, her accusation delivered with confidence and conviction. Potiphar, upon hearing the claim, was enraged. Though he had trusted Joseph implicitly, he was confronted with a situation that seemed undeniable in appearance, leaving him in a position of both confusion and authority. The sense of injustice was heavy in the household. Joseph, though innocent, found himself bound and taken away to the prison of Pharaoh, a place where the guilty and the accused were kept under watch. The walls were high and rough, the air heavy with the scent of stone and unwashed bodies, and the light dimmed by narrow windows that offered little view of the outside world. Though his surroundings were harsh, Joseph's heart remained calm. He did not despair, for he understood that his circumstances, however painful, were part of a larger plan. In the quiet of the prison, Joseph began to reflect on the series of events that had brought him to this place. He thought of his father Jacob, of the betrayal by his brothers, of the journey to Egypt, and of the responsibilities he had carried in Potiphar's household. Each moment had shaped him, prepared him, and strengthened his resolve. Now, in a place of confinement, he recognized that patience, humility, and trust would be his companions. He did not allow anger, fear, or bitterness to consume him. Instead, he remained attentive to his duties, even in this new and challenging environment. The prison, though dark and confining, was not without its own rhythms and tasks. Joseph observed the operations carefully, noting the movements of guards and prisoners, understanding the relationships and hierarchies within the walls, and offering his assistance when possible. He tended to small duties with the same diligence he had shown in Potiphar's house, gaining the respect of both the guards and fellow prisoners. Even in confinement, his integrity and calm wisdom began to distinguish him. Word of Joseph's character gradually spread within the prison. The warden, noticing Joseph's reliability and intelligence, began to entrust him with responsibilities. He was allowed to manage certain aspects of the prison's operations, to organize provisions, and to oversee tasks that required careful attention. Joseph carried out these duties with the same meticulous care and fairness he had shown in Potiphar's house. His presence brought order, calm, and efficiency to a place often marked by fear and disorder. Despite the harshness of his surroundings, Joseph maintained a sense of hope and faith. He reflected on the lessons of his youth, the guidance of God, and the experiences that had shaped him thus far. Each day in prison became an opportunity to cultivate patience, to demonstrate integrity, and to continue learning and growing. The injustices he endured did not harden his heart. Instead, they strengthened his reliance on faith and the quiet confidence that righteousness and truth would ultimately prevail. Prison life brought Joseph into contact with other men who were also held for various reasons, some guilty, some falsely accused. He observed their behaviors, their fears, and their hopes, and he began to offer guidance and support where appropriate. He listened carefully to their concerns, offering insight and calm counsel, always mindful of the dignity and respect of those around him. His compassion and wisdom began to set him apart, and prisoners and guards alike recognized a presence that was steady, fair, and reliable. Even as he managed his daily responsibilities, Joseph did not allow bitterness to take root. He remembered his dreams, the visions he had shared with his family long ago, and the sense of purpose that had carried him through every trial. He understood that his current circumstances, though painful and unjust, were part of a greater design. Each test, each trial, and each challenge became a step in the unfolding of a life marked by faithfulness, diligence, and divine favor. In this quiet resilience, Joseph's character continued to shine. He navigated the complexities of prison life with discernment, treating every individual with fairness, listening carefully, and acting with integrity. His calm presence brought a sense of order and reassurance to a place often marked by uncertainty and fear. The skills he had honed in Potiphar's house management, observation, discernment, and leadership were now applied in an environment that demanded both patience and careful judgment. As the days and weeks passed, Joseph's reputation within the prison grew. He became known not only for his diligence but also for his wisdom and fairness. Fellow prisoners sought his advice, and even the guards began to rely on his judgment. The injustices that had brought him to this place did not define him. Rather, his response to those injustices revealed a depth of character that set him apart and prepared him for the future. Joseph's faith remained a quiet but steady companion. He did not question why he had been falsely accused, nor did he dwell on anger or resentment. Instead, he trusted in the unseen hand that guided his life, understanding that his trials were shaping him, strengthening him, and preparing him for a role far greater than his current circumstances might suggest. Every act of service, every moment of patience, and every decision made with integrity was a step toward fulfillment of the visions he had known since childhood. Even in confinement, Joseph continued to cultivate wisdom, discernment, and humility. He observed the interactions of those around him, learning the subtleties of human behavior, the motives that drove actions, and the consequences that followed choices. This quiet study of character, combined with his own moral steadfastness, prepared him for leadership and influence, ensuring that when the time came, he would be ready to act with fairness, insight, and compassion. The injustices Joseph endured, though profound, never diminished his hope. He remained alert to opportunities to serve faithfully, to apply his skills, and to maintain the integrity that had always defined him. His days in prison were not idle. They were filled with observation, learning, and acts of service that demonstrated his character and built the foundation for the influence he would later wield. Joseph's experience in false accusation and imprisonment became a testament to the quiet strength of patience, integrity, and faith. Though wronged by others, he did not retaliate or despair. He adapted to his circumstances with wisdom, remained steadfast in his principles, and continued to serve diligently. His life in the prison reflected a deeper understanding that even in suffering there is purpose, and that faithfulness to God and moral integrity will ultimately prevail over injustice. In this time of trial, Joseph's spirit was fortified. The lessons of his youth, the guidance of God, and the experiences he had already endured coalesced into a maturity of character that was both remarkable and enduring. The prison walls could not confine his spirit, nor could the false accusations diminish the integrity that had been cultivated within him. Each day, each challenge, and each act of faithful service was a step in the journey of a life marked by divine favor, resilience, and quiet wisdom. Life in the prison continued its steady rhythm, each day bringing with it tasks, observations, and quiet reflection. Joseph, though confined behind high walls and heavy doors, remained attentive and faithful in every moment. His diligence in managing the prison's operations and his integrity in dealing with fellow prisoners had earned him the respect of the warden and the guards. Yet even in this environment, God's favor remained with him, quietly guiding events and revealing purpose in ways Joseph could not yet fully understand. Among those confined in the prison were two men of significance in Pharaoh's household, both of whom had been brought to the prison due to unforeseen circumstances. One was the chief cupbearer, responsible for tasting and serving Pharaoh's wine, a man who carried immense trust in the royal household. The other was the chief baker, entrusted with preparing Pharaoh's food and ensuring the security and quality of every meal. Both men found themselves prisoners, each carrying the weight of their roles and the consequences of perceived failure. One morning, Joseph observed that these men were troubled. The cupbearer and the baker had been given positions of responsibility in Pharaoh's household, and yet now found themselves confined, unsure of the cause and fearful of the outcomes. Their expressions revealed anxiety, their hands fidgeted with uncertainty, and their conversations hinted at questions and fears they could not voice openly. Joseph, ever attentive and compassionate, noticed the weight of their concern and prepared to offer quiet counsel. After some time, the two men approached Joseph, recognizing in him a presence of calm wisdom. They spoke of dreams that had troubled them during the night, visions filled with symbols and events that seemed mysterious and yet carried a sense of urgency. The cupbearer, with his voice low and cautious, described a dream in which he stood before Pharaoh, offering him wine, yet found himself in an unusual and unsettling scenario. The baker followed, recounting a dream of baskets and unusual occurrences, both vivid and perplexing, leaving him unable to find peace or clarity. Joseph listened with careful attention, his mind quietly discerning the patterns and symbols in the dreams. He understood that these visions, though troubling to the dreamers, held messages that required interpretation, messages that were not mere coincidence but guidance from God. He spoke calmly, offering reassurance to both men, explaining that the meanings of their dreams were revealed by the one who watches over all creation, who knows the hearts and destinies of all people. He first addressed the cupbearer, describing with clarity and precision the significance of the dream he had recounted. Joseph explained that the dream indicated restoration to his former position, that he would return to the service of Pharaoh and be reinstated in his trusted role. The cupbearer listened intently, his anxiety giving way to relief, as Joseph described the sequence of events and the favor that would be returned to him. Joseph's words were measured, kind, and infused with a quiet authority that inspired confidence. Turning to the baker, Joseph interpreted the second dream with equal care. He explained that the dream foretold misfortune, that the baker's position would not be restored, and that he would face the consequences of his circumstances. Though the message was difficult, Joseph delivered it with compassion and honesty, ensuring that the baker understood the significance of the vision and the certainty of the outcome. His interpretation was not harsh or cruel, but a clear reflection of the truths revealed in the dreams, communicated with care and integrity. The accuracy of Joseph's interpretations became evident in the days that followed. The cupbearer was released from prison, reinstated to his position in Pharaoh's household, and resumed his duties with renewed trust and responsibility. He carried with him a sense of gratitude and a recognition of the young man who had spoken truth and insight, a man whose wisdom was not born of study alone but of divine guidance and discernment. The baker, however, faced the outcome foretold in his dream, a sobering reminder of the accuracy of Joseph's gift and the presence of divine order even in the midst of suffering. The events in the prison demonstrated to Joseph and those around him that God's favor was not limited by walls, chains, or injustice. Even in a place of confinement, divine guidance could manifest through insight, wisdom, and careful interpretation of dreams. Joseph's abilities became evident not through power or authority, but through attentiveness, discernment, and a willingness to serve faithfully, even when the surrounding circumstances were harsh and unfair. News of the cupbearer's restoration and the baker's fate gradually spread within the prison and beyond. Fellow prisoners began to recognize Joseph as a man of insight and fairness, someone whose interpretations were not self-serving but offered in service to others. His presence became a source of calm and guidance, and those who knew him began to rely on his counsel in both practical matters and spiritual reflections. Joseph's interactions with the cupbearer also revealed the subtle dynamics of hope and gratitude. Though the cupbearer had been restored to his position, he carried the memory of Joseph's kindness and insight, a reminder of the trust and faith that had guided him in interpreting the dream. Joseph did not request favors or seek recognition. His service was quiet, humble, and faithful. Yet the cupbearer's eventual return to Pharaoh's household carried with it the promise of a future opportunity, one that would become a pivotal moment in Joseph's journey. The prison, though confining, became a place of growth and preparation. Joseph observed the interactions of others, noting character, behavior, and patterns of thought. He continued to manage tasks, oversee provisions, and offer guidance where needed, blending practical skill with spiritual discernment. His time in confinement was not idle or wasted. It was filled with learning, observation, and opportunities to demonstrate integrity. Every interaction, every task, and every interpretation became part of the cultivation of a wisdom that was both practical and divinely guided. In his quiet moments, Joseph reflected on the unfolding of events. He remembered the dreams of his youth, the visions he had shared with his family, and the path that had led him from the hills of Canaan to the house of Potiphar, and now to the prison in Egypt. He saw a pattern of divine guidance, a hand leading him through trials, preparing him for responsibilities far beyond his current circumstances. Each dream he interpreted became a thread in the tapestry of purpose, a demonstration that faithfulness and discernment were recognized and honored, even in the most challenging conditions. Joseph's growing reputation within the prison also demonstrated the subtle power of character and divine favor. Other prisoners observed his fairness, diligence, and ability to understand complex situations. Guards and officials noted his reliability and calm presence. The order he brought to daily routines, the insight he demonstrated in interpreting dreams, and the quiet authority he exhibited made him a figure of respect and trust. Even in a place of confinement, Joseph's actions revealed a life guided by principle, patience, and divine wisdom. The experiences with the cupbearer and the baker were not isolated events, but part of a continuum that prepared Joseph for future opportunities. He learned to listen carefully, discern patterns, and communicate truth with compassion and clarity. His interpretations were not based solely on observation, but on a deep reliance on divine guidance, a recognition that insight and understanding flow from God. This approach set Joseph apart, highlighting a life in which faithfulness and wisdom were inseparable, and demonstrating that even in hardship, one could serve with purpose and integrity. Through these events, Joseph's understanding of human nature deepened. He saw the fears, hopes, and uncertainties of those around him, and he learned to offer counsel that balanced truth with compassion. The prison became a microcosm in which he refined his skills in leadership, communication, and judgment. Each task, each conversation, and each dream interpretation contributed to the growth of a character that would later influence nations and shape destinies. Even in the face of injustice, Joseph's spirit remained steady. He did not allow resentment or despair to guide his actions, nor did he seek personal gain from the misfortunes of others. His focus remained on serving faithfully, interpreting dreams with clarity, and maintaining integrity in every interaction. The calmness, patience, and discernment he exhibited became a source of inspiration and stability within the prison, and his presence transformed what might have been a place of despair into an environment where order, guidance, and quiet hope could flourish. Joseph's time interpreting dreams in prison revealed a fundamental truth. Even in confinement, faithfulness and divine guidance could manifest in tangible ways. He learned to trust that every trial, every challenge, and every act of service had a purpose, that God's favor was present even when circumstances appeared bleak, and that integrity and diligence would ultimately lead to opportunities beyond imagination. The restoration of the cupbearer and the fate of the baker were lessons in discernment, hope, and responsibility. Joseph's gift of interpreting dreams was not merely an intellectual skill, but a reflection of a life attuned to divine guidance, a demonstration that even in the darkest circumstances, wisdom and insight could shine forth. His reputation continued to grow, quietly spreading beyond the prison walls, laying the groundwork for the greater role he would eventually assume in Pharaoh's household and the nation of Egypt. Time moved forward in its quiet rhythm, and Joseph continued his faithful service within the prison, tending to duties, offering guidance to fellow prisoners, and observing the subtle workings of God's hand in every circumstance. Though the walls confined his body, his mind remained alert, his spirit attentive to the guidance and insight that had carried him through every trial. The days passed with steady diligence, and the lessons he had learned prepared him for a moment that would soon arrive, a moment that would shift the course of his life and the fate of an entire nation. It was the Pharaoh himself who became the catalyst for this turning point. Pharaoh, ruler of all Egypt, a man accustomed to power, wealth, and the responsibilities of governance, began to experience dreams that troubled him deeply. Night after night, visions unfolded in his mind, vivid and perplexing, each carrying a weight of meaning that he could not comprehend. The first dream presented 7 healthy, robust cows grazing peacefully near the Nile, followed by 7 cows that were thin, frail, and devoured the healthy ones, leaving them barren and lifeless. The second dream mirrored this in grain, as 7 full and abundant ears of corn appeared, only to be followed by 7 thin and scorched ears that swallowed the others, leaving the land with a sense of emptiness and impending need. Pharaoh awoke each time with a mixture of curiosity, fear, and unease. He knew that dreams carried significance, especially for a ruler whose decisions affected millions. Yet the meaning of these visions eluded him. He consulted magicians, wise men, and soothsayers, seeking clarity and interpretation. They offered words of counsel, but their explanations were vague, uncertain, and unsatisfying. The images remained puzzling, the implications heavy, and Pharaoh's sense of responsibility pressed upon him with growing urgency. It was in this context that the cupbearer, who had been restored to his position after Joseph's interpretation of his dream, remembered the young man who had offered insight in prison. He recalled with gratitude the calm wisdom and accuracy with which Joseph had explained the visions that had troubled him. Pharaoh's servant spoke of Joseph as someone whose understanding was guided by divine insight, a man who listened carefully, discerned meaning with precision, and communicated truth with clarity. The cupbearer remembered Joseph's words and the fulfillment that had followed, and he realized that this young man, once a prisoner, could offer the understanding that Pharaoh so urgently required. The cupbearer, with careful words, recommended Joseph to Pharaoh, explaining the circumstances of his imprisonment and the accuracy of his previous interpretations. Joseph was brought from the prison to the royal court, a journey that must have filled him with quiet anticipation. He moved with dignity, calmness, and humility, aware that the moment carried great responsibility, yet trusting in the providence that had guided him through every trial. He stood before Pharaoh, a young man whose reputation for wisdom and integrity preceded him, ready to offer clarity in a situation that had troubled the greatest ruler in the land. Pharaoh described his dreams to Joseph, recounting the details with concern and careful attention. The imagery of the healthy and thin cows, the abundant and withered ears of grain, was vivid, each element carrying a sense of impending consequence. Joseph listened patiently, his mind absorbing every detail, carefully discerning the patterns and seeking the meaning that lay beyond the surface. He understood that these dreams were not merely random images, but messages of divine guidance, revealing a future that required preparation, foresight, and wise action. With calm authority, Joseph explained the meaning of Pharaoh's dreams. He described the visions as a warning from God, indicating 7 years of abundance followed by 7 years of severe famine. The healthy cows and the full ears of grain represented years of prosperity, a time when the land would yield plentiful harvests and resources would flourish. The thin cows and the scorched ears symbolized years of scarcity, a period when food would be scarce and careful planning would be essential to preserve the well-being of the people. Joseph's words were clear, measured, and infused with wisdom, offering not only understanding but a course of action to address the challenges ahead. Joseph advised Pharaoh to take action during the years of abundance, gathering and storing surplus grain to prepare for the coming years of famine. He suggested a plan of collection, storage, and management, ensuring that the resources of the land would be preserved and distributed wisely. His recommendations were practical, comprehensive, and rooted in careful observation and foresight. Pharaoh listened attentively, recognizing not only the accuracy of the interpretation, but also the wisdom and prudence of the advice offered. Impressed by Joseph's insight and understanding, Pharaoh saw in him a unique talent, someone capable not only of interpreting dreams, but also of managing the practical steps necessary to safeguard the nation. Pharaoh recognized the presence of divine guidance in Joseph's words, a wisdom that transcended human knowledge, and he entrusted him with a position of authority, giving him oversight of the land of Egypt in preparation for the coming years. Joseph's rise to prominence was marked by calm diligence, humility, and faithfulness. Though the task was immense, he approached it with the same careful attention, patience, and integrity that had characterized his service in Potiphar's house and his time in prison. He organized administrators, coordinated storage and distribution, and oversaw the collection of resources with a meticulous hand. His leadership was characterized by fairness, wisdom, and an ability to anticipate challenges, ensuring that the land would be prepared for the coming famine without causing unnecessary hardship or disorder. The years of abundance were filled with careful planning and diligent work. Joseph traveled throughout the regions of Egypt, ensuring that the granaries were filled, the supplies secured, and the systems in place to manage resources effectively. He taught the administrators to manage with fairness, to observe with careful attention, and to act with discernment. The land flourished under his guidance, and the prosperity of Egypt became a testament to the wisdom and diligence of a young man whose life had been shaped by trials, faith, and divine favor. Even as Joseph managed the practical details, he remained aware of the spiritual dimension of his work. He recognized that the providence guiding him was part of a larger design, a plan that extended beyond personal ambition or human understanding. His interpretations of Pharaoh's dreams, the preparations for the famine, and the administration of resources were all elements of a life guided by faith, patience, and steadfast adherence to integrity. Every decision, every action, and every insight reflected a deep awareness that he was part of a purpose far greater than himself. As the years of abundance continued, Joseph's reputation grew within Pharaoh's court and throughout Egypt. His calm wisdom, fairness, and diligent oversight inspired confidence among officials, administrators, and the people. He became a figure of trust and authority, someone whose guidance ensured not only the survival but the flourishing of the nation. His rise was not marked by arrogance or self-interest, but by service, integrity, and the ability to see beyond the immediate circumstances to the long-term needs of the people. The coming years of famine would test the systems Joseph had put in place, yet the careful preparation ensured that the nation would endure. The granaries were full, resources managed wisely, and the administration trained to respond to the challenges ahead. Joseph's foresight and planning, guided by insight and faith, allowed Egypt to navigate a period of scarcity with provision and care, preventing widespread suffering and securing the well-being of the people. In this time, the providence of God was revealed not only in the interpretation of dreams, but in the practical unfolding of events. Joseph's life, shaped by trials, betrayal, and faithfulness, culminated in a moment where wisdom, preparation, and divine guidance intersected to preserve a nation. His rise to prominence in Pharaoh's court demonstrated that even in the midst of injustice and confinement, faithfulness, integrity, and diligent service are recognized and rewarded in ways that extend beyond human understanding. Joseph's position in Egypt was more than administrative authority. It was a manifestation of providence, a moment where the lessons of his past, the skills he had developed, and the favor of God converged. He navigated the responsibilities with calm assurance, addressing challenges with discernment, and guiding the people with wisdom and fairness. The dreams that had troubled Pharaoh became a catalyst for preparation and provision, and Joseph's insight transformed uncertainty into order, scarcity into foresight, and anxiety into confidence. Through these events, Joseph's life demonstrated a profound principle. Even the trials that seem most unjust or difficult can serve a greater purpose when met with integrity, diligence, and faith. The experiences of betrayal, imprisonment, and challenge had prepared him for this moment, equipping him with the wisdom, patience, and moral strength required to manage responsibilities of immense magnitude. The palace, once distant and intimidating, became a place where his talents could flourish, guided by divine purpose and careful stewardship. Joseph's rise to prominence in Egypt was not the result of ambition or chance, but the culmination of a life shaped by faith, patience, and steadfast service. The interpretation of Pharaoh's dreams, the careful preparations for the years of famine, and the administration of the land were all expressions of a divine plan, revealed through the diligence, wisdom, and integrity of a young man whose journey had been marked by trials, trust, and faithfulness. The years of preparation and diligence in gathering and storing Egypt's abundance reached their culmination as Joseph's wisdom and insight became increasingly evident. Pharaoh, impressed by the young man's clarity, foresight, and ability to organize the nation's resources, began to rely on Joseph with an unprecedented level of trust. Joseph's calm and measured approach, coupled with his profound understanding of the land and its people, revealed that he possessed not only administrative skill, but also a wisdom that seemed beyond human ability, a reflection of divine guidance quietly shaping the destiny of the nation. Pharaoh observed Joseph closely, noting the precision with which he managed the granaries, the fairness with which he delegated responsibilities, and the discernment he displayed in addressing both the smallest and the most significant matters. Joseph's ability to balance firmness with compassion, authority with humility, and foresight with practicality inspired confidence. Officials, administrators, and the people looked upon him with respect, recognizing that his guidance brought order and stability, even as the shadow of famine approached. Recognizing the extraordinary talent and divine insight within Joseph, Pharaoh made a remarkable decision. He elevated Joseph to a position of unprecedented authority, giving him charge over the land of Egypt, second only to Pharaoh himself. Joseph was entrusted with the responsibility of implementing the plans that would preserve the nation through the years of scarcity, managing the distribution of resources, and ensuring that every region received fair and sufficient provision. This elevation was not merely a reward for past service, but a testament to the careful unfolding of divine providence. A moment where preparation, skill, and faith converged. In assuming this new role, Joseph approached his responsibilities with the same diligence, humility, and wisdom that had characterized his earlier service. He understood the gravity of his position, aware that the decisions he made would affect the lives of countless individuals. Yet he did not allow the weight of authority to overwhelm him. Instead, he relied on the lessons of his past, the insights gained through trials and experience, and the quiet guidance that had accompanied him through every stage of life. Joseph organized Egypt with careful attention to detail. He appointed administrators to oversee the collection, storage, and distribution of grain, ensuring that each district was prepared for the coming years of famine. He established systems of record-keeping, supply management, and distribution that were both efficient and fair, balancing the needs of the people with the resources available. Every decision was made with prudence, foresight, and a keen understanding of human nature, demonstrating the wisdom that had become the hallmark of his leadership. His rise to this position also revealed the subtle ways in which faith and integrity influence leadership. Joseph's authority was not asserted through fear or coercion, but earned through consistent diligence, fairness, and an unwavering commitment to justice. Those who worked under him respected and trusted him, recognizing that his decisions were guided not by personal ambition, but by a desire to serve faithfully and wisely. The people of Egypt, though initially unaware of the young man's history as a prisoner, came to see the results of his guidance in the abundance, stability, and careful management of the nation's resources. Even in his elevated role, Joseph remained attentive to the needs and concerns of those around him. He listened carefully to the officials and administrators, addressed complaints with fairness, and encouraged the participation of others in the management of resources. His leadership was marked by inclusivity, discernment, and an awareness of the broader consequences of each decision. By fostering collaboration and trust, Joseph ensured that the systems he implemented would function smoothly, even under the pressures of scarcity. As the years of abundance came to a close, Joseph's foresight became increasingly vital. He anticipated the approaching famine with precision, ensuring that grain was distributed strategically and stored securely. His plans accounted for variations in climate, crop yield, and regional needs, demonstrating a level of insight that combined practical intelligence with divine guidance. The preparation of Egypt under Joseph's leadership became a model of careful stewardship, a demonstration of how wisdom, planning, and integrity can safeguard a nation in times of uncertainty. Joseph's rapid ascent was also a profound personal transformation. The trials of his youth, the betrayal by his brothers, The injustice of false accusation and the challenges of prison life had all shaped him into a leader capable of navigating complexity with calm assurance. His integrity, patience, and faithfulness had been refined through adversity, preparing him for the responsibilities of ruling alongside Pharaoh. The elevation was not simply a political appointment. It was the recognition of a life lived with steadfast devotion to principle and the careful cultivation of character. In this new role, Joseph also demonstrated remarkable emotional intelligence. He understood the fears, motivations, and hopes of those around him, whether officials, administrators, or common citizens. He addressed concerns with empathy, balanced enforcement with compassion, and anticipated problems before they escalated. His ability to combine practical management with understanding of human nature allowed him to navigate challenges that might have overwhelmed a less perceptive leader. The elevation to second in command also brought Joseph into close collaboration with Pharaoh, a relationship built on mutual respect, trust, and the recognition of Joseph's unique talents. Pharaoh relied on Joseph's insight not only for administrative matters, but also for counsel on broader issues affecting the kingdom. Joseph's interpretations of dreams, his foresight in planning, and his wisdom in governance became invaluable assets, ensuring that Egypt would endure the coming years of famine with provision and stability. Despite the magnitude of his responsibilities, Joseph did not lose sight of the principles that had guided him throughout his life. He continued to act with humility, integrity, and fairness, recognizing that authority carries the weight of responsibility. He avoided arrogance, treated those around him with respect, and approached every challenge with careful thought and discernment. His leadership was a reflection of the values instilled in him from childhood, refined through experience, and guided by the quiet but steadfast presence of divine providence. The preparations for the famine were meticulous. Joseph oversaw the construction of storehouses, the careful collection of surplus grain, and the organization of distribution networks that would sustain the nation during years of scarcity. He trained administrators to manage resources responsibly, ensuring accountability, efficiency, and fairness. Every step of the plan reflected careful attention to detail and a comprehensive understanding of the needs of the people, demonstrating a combination of foresight, prudence, and compassion that few could match. Joseph's elevation also highlighted the principle that true leadership is rooted in service. Though he wielded authority second only to Pharaoh, his focus remained on the well-being of the people and the stability of the nation. He acted not for personal gain or recognition, but to fulfill the responsibilities entrusted to him, guided by wisdom and a deep sense of purpose. His leadership became a model of diligence, integrity, and the quiet strength that arises from faithfulness and moral clarity. As the first signs of famine appeared, Joseph's careful planning ensured that Egypt was prepared. The stored grain provided sustenance for the people. The distribution systems functioned efficiently, and the administration he had trained responded effectively to challenges. The nation endured a period that could have brought despair and hardship, yet through Joseph's guidance, it was marked by provision, order, and careful stewardship. His rise to second in command was not merely a personal achievement, but a moment in which the convergence of preparation, skill, and divine favor preserved a nation. Even in the midst of authority and accomplishment, Joseph remained attentive to humility and perspective. He recognized that the opportunities afforded to him were part of a larger design, a plan that extended beyond personal ambition or human understanding. His stewardship of Egypt reflected the careful balance of practical skill, moral integrity, and faithfulness to the guidance he had received throughout his life. Every decision, every action, and every plan was infused with a quiet awareness that his position was not for personal glory, but for service to others and the fulfillment of a providential plan. Joseph's elevation to second in command marked the fulfillment of a long and complex journey. From the hills of Canaan to the house of Potiphar, from the darkness of prison to the administrative responsibilities of Pharaoh's court, every stage of his life had prepared him for this moment. His rapid ascent demonstrated that patience, faithfulness, and integrity, even in the most challenging circumstances, are recognized and rewarded. It was a testament to the quiet, enduring work of character, wisdom, and divine guidance, revealing that providence unfolds in ways that are often unseen but profoundly transformative. The famine began in a whisper, almost unnoticed at first. The rains that had once blessed the fertile Nile Valley seemed hesitant that year, as if the clouds themselves were withholding their mercy. Fields that had been green and vibrant turned dry and brittle, and the once abundant grain stocks began to thin. Farmers looked to the heavens for relief, but the skies remained stubbornly blue, and the heat pressed down like a heavy hand upon the land. Yet, within the walls of Egypt's storehouses, there was no panic. There was no desperate cry of hunger or fear. The reason was Joseph, the man who had been elevated to the second highest position in the kingdom. His foresight, granted by divine wisdom, had ensured that Egypt was prepared for this very hour. In the 7 years of abundance, when the land had overflowed with harvest, Joseph had ordered 1/5 of all produce to be stored away. Granaries had risen across the land, strong and vast, their walls bulging with grain, as if Egypt itself had become a vessel of life. Now those granaries stood like silent sentinels, ready to guard Egypt through the years of want. When the first signs of famine reached Pharaoh, Joseph was summoned once more to the royal court. The hall shimmered with gold and polished stone, but there was a new tension in the air. Pharaoh sat upon his throne, his eyes watchful, yet calm, for he trusted the man who had interpreted his dreams. Joseph approached with measured steps, clothed in fine linen, the signet ring still gleaming upon his hand. He bowed low before the throne, his heart steady, for he knew that the Lord who had lifted him from the pit and the prison was the same Lord who now upheld him in the palace. Pharaoh spoke, his voice carrying through the hall. The years of plenty have passed, and now the earth withholds her strength. Tell me, Joseph, how shall we proceed? Joseph lifted his eyes and answered with quiet confidence, My Lord, the plan remains as we set forth in the time of abundance. We have stored the grain according to your decree. The people will come to you for bread, and you shall not turn them away. We will open the storehouses and sustain the land. Pharaoh nodded, relief softening his face. Do as you have spoken, for in you there is wisdom greater than any man of Egypt. And so it began. Under Joseph's command, the granaries opened their heavy gates, and the grain poured forth like streams of gold. From every province, from every village and town, the people came, their faces drawn by hunger, yet brightened with hope. Long lines formed outside the storehouses, winding like rivers through the streets, and Joseph's officials distributed the grain according to his careful orders. None were overlooked, and none were left to starve. But the famine was not confined to Egypt alone. It stretched its arms across the lands, reaching into Canaan, into the hills and valleys where Joseph's own family dwelt. In distant fields once green with pasture, the ground cracked with thirst, and the flocks wandered thin and weary. Word spread quickly that in Egypt there was food, and nations turned their eyes toward the kingdom by the Nile. Caravans appeared upon the horizon, their camels laden not with goods to sell, but with silver to purchase life. Traders came from the east and the west, their garments coated with dust, their voices speaking many tongues, yet all asking the same question: where is the man who sells the grain? And always the answer came: go to Joseph, he will give you bread. Joseph stood often in the courts of distribution, watching as the plans he had laid under God's guidance unfolded with perfect precision. The officials carried out their duties with diligence, for they had learned to respect the Hebrew governor whose wisdom had preserved a nation. Joseph walked among the people sometimes, speaking gently, ensuring that fairness prevailed. To him, this was not mere administration. It was stewardship of life, a sacred trust entrusted by the Almighty. The storehouses that had once seemed overflowing began to show the strain of constant withdrawal. Yet Joseph was not afraid. The measure had been taken with foresight, and he knew that what had been stored was enough. His mind returned often to the dreams of his youth, the visions of sheaves bowing down, the stars inclining in homage. How strange those dreams had seemed then, and how impossible, yet here he stood, not in pride, but in awe of the hand that had woven his life from the threads of betrayal, slavery, and suffering into this tapestry of purpose. As the famine deepened, Egypt flourished under Joseph's care. While other lands groaned in want, Egypt became a beacon of provision. Pharaoh's treasury grew rich as silver poured in from every corner of the earth in exchange for grain. But Joseph's eyes were not fixed on wealth. His heart was set on the preservation of life. He remembered the words of the Lord, silent yet certain in his soul. It was not you who sent me here, but God, to preserve life. One day, Joseph rode out in his chariot to survey the land. The once green fields now lay bare, their stubble brittle under the sun. But the roads were alive with movement. Wagons creaked under the weight of sacks filled with grain. Oxen strained in their yokes, and men walked beside their loads with faces brightened by relief. Children laughed as they clutched small loaves of bread, and mothers wept tears of gratitude. Joseph's heart swelled at the sight. These lives, these faces, were the reason for every trial he had endured. In the royal court, Pharaoh spoke often of Joseph's greatness, declaring to his nobles, "Have we ever found such a man, in whom is the Spirit of God? The land would have perished, but for him." The courtiers nodded, for they knew it was true. Joseph was no longer the foreigner, the stranger from Canaan. He was the savior of Egypt, the man through whom life had triumphed over death. But even as Egypt thrived, Joseph knew that the famine was far from over. This was only the beginning of the years of hardship foretold by God. His vigilance did not waver. He continued to oversee the distribution with precision, ensuring that Egypt's stores would last until the appointed time of plenty returned. He sent out messengers to distant regions, establishing trade routes and securing alliances. His wisdom was sought not only for grain but for counsel, and rulers from other lands sent envoys to hear the words of the man who had tamed the famine. And still, in the quiet of his heart, Joseph longed for the land of his fathers, for the hills of Canaan, for the faces he had not seen in so many years. Did they yet live, his brothers who had sold him, his father who had loved him so dearly? He did not know, but he trusted the God who had brought him thus far, the God whose plans reached beyond the grasp of men. So the famine raged on, relentless and unyielding, yet Egypt stood secure. And in the midst of it all, Joseph walked humbly, his every step a testimony to the faithfulness of the one who had turned the pit into a palace, the sorrow into salvation. The famine tightened its grip upon the land like a relentless hand that would not let go. The skies remained stubbornly empty, devoid of the life-giving rain that once blessed the fields of Canaan. The earth cracked under the unyielding sun, and the once fertile soil turned to powder beneath the feet of shepherds who now wandered aimlessly with gaunt flocks. Streams that had long danced in the valleys dwindled to trickles and then vanished altogether, leaving only dry beds and the memory of water. In tents across the hills of Hebron, hunger became a constant companion. It was no longer a whisper, but a cry that could not be ignored. Jacob, the patriarch whose hair had long since turned silver, sat in silence one morning, listening to the low murmurs of his household. He heard the thin wail of a child, the restless shuffling of men whose bellies ached with emptiness, and the subdued sobbing of women who had stretched every morsel as far as love could manage. The old man's heart was heavy, for he knew what was coming, a decision that would pierce his soul. Jacob gathered his sons before him, those same sons whose faces were drawn and sombre with need. Reuben the eldest stood to one side, his brow furrowed with responsibility he felt but could not fully bear. Judah, strong and resolute, looked upon his father with a gaze that was both pleading and firm. Simeon and Levi, restless and tense, shifted their weight as though impatient to act, and the younger ones, Issachar, Zebulun, Gad, Asher, lingered in the shadows, quiet but watchful. Benjamin remained by Jacob's side, his presence a living reminder of Rachel, the beloved wife whose absence was still an ache that time could not erase. Jacob broke the silence at last, his voice rough with both age and grief. "Why do you sit here looking at one another?" His words were not harsh, but they carried the urgency of a man pressed to the edge by circumstance. "I have heard there is grain in Egypt. Go down and buy some for us, so that we may live and not die." The mention of Egypt sent a ripple through the group, though none dared speak the thought that lingered like a shadow over their hearts. Egypt, the land of strangers, the realm of Pharaoh, where men bowed before the splendor of gods they did not know. To journey there was no small matter, yet the alternative was unthinkable. Starvation would strip them of choice if they delayed any longer. Reuben stepped forward, his deep voice carrying the weight of decision. "Father, we will go." His eyes flickered briefly toward Benjamin, then back to Jacob. "But let the boy stay here with you. We will not risk him on such a road." Jacob's hands tightened on his staff. At the name of Benjamin, a storm passed across his features, a mingling of love, fear, and unspoken memories. He saw again the day Joseph vanished, the torn robe stained with blood, and the hollow anguish that followed. That wound had never healed. To part with Benjamin, the last son of Rachel, was a thought he could not bear. So he nodded, his jaw set in grim resolve. "Benjamin stays. Go, all of you, and return quickly." And so it was settled. 10 brothers prepared for the journey, gathering what silver they had left, their beasts of burden, and the empty sacks that would soon hold life itself. As they set out, the wind carried with them more than dust. It bore the weight of guilt that clung like a shroud. For every step toward Egypt was also a step toward a past they had tried to bury but never truly could. The road was long and harsh, winding through barren lands that offered little solace. Days stretched into nights beneath a sky that glittered coldly above their hunger and weariness. They spoke little, for words were fragile things when pressed against the silence of famine and the louder silence of shared sin. Each man carried within him the echo of Joseph's cries from that pit years ago, cries they had silenced with silver coins and hardened hearts. But time had not erased them. They whispered now in the rustle of dry grass, in the groan of camels, in the hollow throb of empty stomachs. At last, the grandeur of Egypt rose before them, a land spared from hunger by some unseen providence. Where Canaan withered, Egypt thrived. Fields lay golden under the sun, nourished by the mighty Nile, that river of life whose waters defied the drought. Palms swayed in the warm breeze, and the air hummed with the voices of traders, servants, and soldiers. For men who had trudged through desolation, the sight was almost a dream, yet it was real enough to fill them with both wonder and unease. They passed through gates adorned with carvings of falcons and lotus flowers, symbols of gods whose names they did not know. The streets teemed with color and movement merchants displaying spices that perfumed the air, women balancing baskets of grain upon their heads, scribes bending over rolls of papyrus, soldiers gleaming in bronze and linen. Everywhere, order and abundance reigned, a stark contrast to the famine-scarred hills they had left behind. But the brothers had little time for marveling, for their purpose was urgent. They were led to the great halls where grain was measured and sold, the very place where Egypt's vast storehouses were governed. And there, seated upon a raised platform, was the man who held the power of life and death in this season of want, the governor of Egypt. They did not know him. How could they? Before them stood a figure robed in linen of the finest weave, a chain of gold resting upon his chest, a signet ring glinting upon his hand. His eyes were lined with kohl, as was the custom of the land, and his head bore the smoothness of one who embraced the ways of Egypt. Everything about him spoke of authority, wisdom, and wealth. He was second only to Pharaoh, a man before whom even nobles bent low. And so the brothers bowed deeply, their faces nearly to the ground, never dreaming that this lord of Egypt was the boy they had betrayed, now grown and transformed. Joseph saw them. The moment his gaze fell upon those familiar faces, time folded in upon itself. Years dissolved like mist, and he was once more a youth, standing at the edge of a pit, staring up at brothers whose eyes held no mercy. He remembered the rough hands that seized him, the laughter that mocked his pleas, the final glimpse of home as a caravan bore him away. Yet mingled with those memories was the long road, since the chains of slavery, the shadow of prison, the sudden dawn of favour that had lifted him to this place. And through it all, one truth had burned steady: God was with him. Now, here they were, those same brothers, bent in supplication before him, their voices low as they spoke in the tongue of Canaan, unaware that the man who listened understood every word. Joseph's heart surged with emotions too vast to name: grief for years lost, anger that flickered and died before it could take hold, wonder at the strange weaving of providence that had brought him here. He did not reveal himself, not yet. Instead, he masked his thoughts behind the inscrutable calm of an Egyptian ruler and spoke through an interpreter, his tone cool and commanding. "Where do you come from?" he asked. "From the land of Canaan," they replied, "to buy food." Joseph's eyes swept over them, counting, searching. 10 men stood before him, but not 11. Where was Benjamin? And his father, was Jacob still alive? Questions clamoured within him, but he gave no sign. Instead, he spoke words that startled them like a blow. "You are spies. You have come to see the nakedness of the land." Their protests tumbled out at once, desperate and earnest. "No, my lord, your servants have come to buy food. We are all sons of one man. We are honest men. Your servants are not spies." "Honest men," Joseph echoed inwardly, a bitter smile flickering unseen. Yet aloud he said, "Number, you have come to see the weakness of Egypt." Again they pleaded, their words a cascade of defence. "We, your servants, were 12 brothers, the sons of one man in the land of Canaan. The youngest is now with our father, and one is no more. One is no more." The phrase struck Joseph like an arrow, though he kept his face as still as stone. To them, he was a ghost, a memory buried beneath years of dust. But he lived, and he stood before them clothed in authority they could not imagine. This was no chance meeting. This was the turning of a great wheel, the unfolding of a plan far larger than their guilt or his pain. Yet for now, Joseph concealed the truth, for there was a test yet to come, a test that would reveal their hearts, a test that would set the stage for redemption. And so the drama deepened in that hall of grain, where 10 brothers knelt before the brother they had cast away, unaware that the hand of God moved silently among them, shaping destinies with threads of famine and plenty, loss and restoration. The words hung in the air, trembling with the weight of years unspoken. One is no more. Joseph's heart clenched, not from anger now, but from the ache of memory. He could see himself in their words erased, forgotten, turned into a shadow of the past. Yet here he stood, living and breathing, no longer the boy they betrayed, but the man God had raised for this very hour. He let the silence linger, masking the tempest within with a facade of stern authority. The brothers shifted uneasily on their knees, their eyes darting from one another to the imposing figure before them. They did not know that behind the veil of Egyptian grandeur, the heart of a brother beat fast with longing and sorrow and love that refused to die. "By this you shall be tested," Joseph said through the interpreter, his voice firm yet trembling in places that only he felt. "As Pharaoh lives, you shall not go from this place unless your youngest brother comes here. Send one of you to bring your brother. The rest shall remain confined, that your words may be tested, whether there is truth in you. Or else, as Pharaoh lives, you are spies." A gasp of dismay broke from their lips. The thought of returning to their father without food and without Benjamin was agony. They spoke among themselves in their own tongue, thinking the governor could not understand. But Joseph understood every syllable. "Surely we are being punished because of our brother," one said. And Joseph knew the voice. It was Reuben. "We saw how distressed he was when he pleaded for his life, but we would not listen. That is why this distress has come upon us." Reuben's words struck Joseph like a blade, sharp yet strangely healing. For the first time, he heard remorse in their voices, a crack in the armor of guilt that had bound them all these years. His eyes burned, and he turned away quickly lest they see the storm in his gaze. Tears welled and spilled silently down his cheeks, falling onto the polished floor of Pharaoh's hall. He covered his face for a moment, letting the sobs rise like waves, then mastered himself and returned, the mask of power once more upon his features. He ordered Simeon bound before their eyes and taken away, a gesture harsh in appearance, but necessary to bind the threads of this unfolding plan. The rest he sent back, their sacks filled with grain, their silver secretly restored to their pouches. It was not revenge, but a test of truth, a test of hearts. Would they return? Would they bring Benjamin? Only time would tell. The days passed, and famine pressed harder upon Canaan, until hunger roared where once it had only whispered. At last, Jacob could resist no longer. With a trembling heart, he allowed Benjamin to go, his love wrapped in the cloth of necessity. "Take him," he said, his voice breaking, "and may God Almighty grant you mercy before the man, so that he will let your other brother and Benjamin come back with you." So they went again, their hearts heavy with dread, bearing gifts of balm and honey, spices and myrrh, pistachio nuts and almonds, a humble offering for the Lord of Egypt. And Benjamin, Rachel's last-born, walked among them, his face a gentle echo of Joseph's own youth. When Joseph saw them approaching, and among them Benjamin, his mother's son, his own brother, something within him broke like a dam releasing a flood. He longed to run to him, to gather him into his arms and weep out all the years. But he restrained himself still, for the plan was not yet complete. He ordered a feast prepared, and the brothers were brought to his house, their hearts thudding with fear. Why had the governor summoned them here? Was it for judgment or something else? They entered a hall gleaming with marble and gold, where tables were spread with abundance. They marveled at the splendor, at the servants who moved with silent precision, at the strange honor shown to them. When Joseph came, They bowed low, their faces near the ground. He greeted them with measured courtesy, then asked in a voice steady but tender, "Is your father well, the old man you spoke of? Is he still alive?" "Your servant our father is well. He is still alive," they answered, and they bowed down to pay him honor. Then Joseph lifted his eyes and saw Benjamin, and the world seemed to blur before him. His voice trembled as he asked, "Is this your youngest brother, the one you told me about?" They nodded, and Joseph said softly, "God be gracious to you, my son." In that instant, Joseph could endure no more. His heart burned with love, and tears threatened to betray him. He hurried out of the hall to his private chamber, where he broke down and wept. Great sobs racked his frame, sobs born of longing and joy and the deep ache of years spent apart. He pressed his face into his hands and let the tide of emotion sweep through him until he could breathe again. Then he washed his face, straightened his garments, and returned, his countenance once more composed. But the final test remained. The meal was served, Benjamin's portion 5 times as great as any other, and the brothers marveled but did not protest. They spoke freely among themselves, unaware of the design unfolding around them, and when the time came for them to depart, Joseph gave orders that would bring all to its climax. His silver cup, his personal treasure, was to be placed secretly in Benjamin's sack. At dawn they set out, hearts light with relief, unaware of what awaited them. But before they had gone far, the steward overtook them with an accusation. "Why have you repaid good with evil? Why have you stolen my master's silver cup?" Stunned, they denied it, even offering that whoever was found with the cup should die and the rest become slaves. But when the sacks were opened, from oldest to youngest, there it was in Benjamin's bag. Horror seized them like a vice. They tore their garments in anguish and returned to the city, despair clinging to them like a shroud. Judah spoke with a voice heavy with grief and courage, offering himself in Benjamin's place, lest their father die of sorrow. His words pierced the air, raw and noble, and in that moment Joseph saw what he had longed to see: change. The hardness that once consigned him to a pit was gone. In its place was love, sacrificial and strong. Joseph could restrain himself no longer. He dismissed the attendants until only the brothers remained, then cried out in a voice that shook the walls, "Have everyone leave me!" When they were alone, he wept aloud, so that even Pharaoh's household heard. His brothers stood frozen, terror in their eyes, as Joseph declared in their own tongue, "I am Joseph. Is my father still alive?" Silence fell, a silence thick with shock and fear. They stared at him as though at a spectre, unable to speak. Then he stepped closer, tears streaming down his face, his voice breaking with tenderness. "Come near to me." They came, trembling. "I am your brother Joseph, the one you sold into Egypt. But do not be distressed, and do not be angry with yourselves for selling me here, because it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you." The words poured out like balm upon wounds long festering. For 2 years now there has been famine in the land, and for the next 5 years there will be no ploughing and reaping. But God sent me ahead of you to preserve for you a remnant on earth, and to save your lives by a great deliverance. So then, "It was not you who sent me here, but God." And Joseph wept again, but these were tears of healing, not of pain. He fell upon Benjamin's neck and embraced him, and they both wept. Then he kissed all his brothers and wept over them. And afterward they talked, their voices mingling in a flood of forgiveness that washed away the bitterness of years. What had begun with betrayal ended with grace. The pit had given way to a palace, and vengeance had bowed to mercy. In that hall of Egypt, a family was restored, and the hand of God was revealed in all its wondrous sovereign weaving. Joseph's brothers stood in a silence that spoke louder than words. Relief and wonder mingled with a lingering shadow of guilt, yet Joseph's voice wrapped around them like a soft mantle of peace. His forgiveness was not shallow, it was deep and real, rooted in an understanding that all their pain had been part of a plan greater than any of them could see. He did not merely pardon them, he embraced them fully, restoring what had been broken. "Go quickly to my father," Joseph said, his eyes shining like twin lamps of hope. "Tell him, your son Joseph is alive. God has made him Lord of all Egypt. Come down to me. Do not delay. Bring my father here with all that you have. You shall live in the region of Goshen and be near me, you, your children, your grandchildren, your flocks and herds, and all that you have. There I will provide for you, for there are still 5 years of famine to come. Otherwise you and your household and all who belong to you will become destitute." The brothers listened, hardly daring to believe their ears. The Joseph they had wronged now offered not vengeance but abundance, not exile but a place of honor. He continued, his voice tender yet firm. "You can see for yourselves, and so can my brother Benjamin, that it is really I who am speaking to you. Tell my father about all the honor accorded me in Egypt, and about everything you have seen. Bring my father down here quickly." The hall buzzed with life as servants returned to carry out Joseph's commands. Wagons were prepared, laden with provisions, grain and bread, and rich supplies for the journey. He gave his brothers garments and gifts, but to Benjamin he gave 300 shekels of silver and 5 sets of clothes, a sign of special affection that no longer stirred envy but joy. For they had changed. Their hearts were new, softened by sorrow and shaped by grace. As they departed, Joseph pressed gifts upon them for their father. 10 donkeys loaded with the best things of Egypt, and 10 female donkeys loaded with grain and bread and other provisions. He embraced each brother in turn, his arms strong and his tears warm upon their shoulders. To Benjamin he clung a moment longer, breathing in the scent of family, the echo of a mother they had both loved. Then he let them go, his heart already racing ahead to the day when he would behold his father's face. The brothers left Egypt with hearts pounding, their minds ablaze with wonder. The road stretched long before them, dust rising under the wheels of the wagons. Each mile carried them closer to the tented hills of Canaan, to a father who mourned still, thinking his beloved son long gone. They spoke in hushed voices, marveling at what had passed, at the mercy that had met them when judgment seemed sure, and perhaps, when night fell and the stars burned bright, they lifted their eyes and whispered prayers of gratitude to the God who weaves redemption from the darkest threads. Far away, in the quiet plains of Canaan, Jacob sat beneath the fading light of evening, his face lined with years of grief. The wind stirred the flaps of the tent as if urging him to hope, but hope had long since withered in his soul. He thought often of Joseph, the son of his old age, the child of Rachel's womb, a memory tender and sharp as thorns. He pictured him still, a boy in a coat of many colours, smiling in the sunlight. But that coat had come back torn and bloodied, and Jacob's heart had broken like pottery shattered on stone. Then came the sound of voices, voices urgent and bright, with news too wild to believe. His sons hurried to him, their eyes wide, their words tumbling over one another like rushing waters. "Joseph is still alive! He is ruler over all the land of Egypt." At first, Jacob's heart stood still. It seemed to him like a cruel jest, a dream too sweet to trust. But they told him everything Joseph had said, and when he saw the wagons Joseph had sent, hope flared like a flame rekindled after long darkness. "It is enough," Jacob whispered, his voice trembling like a leaf stirred by the wind. "My son Joseph is still alive. I will go and see him before I die." The journey to Egypt began, a caravan winding through sunlit plains and shadowed valleys, bearing the weight of a father's longing and a family's rebirth. Jacob's heart throbbed with anticipation, but also with fear of the unknown. He paused at Beersheba to offer sacrifices to the God of his father Isaac, and there, in the hush of night, God spoke to him in a vision. "Jacob, Jacob," came the voice like a deep river flowing. "I am God, the God of your father. Do not be afraid to go down to Egypt, for I will make you into a great nation there. I will go down with you to Egypt, and I will surely bring you back again, and Joseph's own hand will close your eyes." Those words sank into Jacob's soul like honeyed balm, easing his trembling spirit. With renewed strength he set forth, every step a drumbeat of hope. The caravan rolled on, carrying sons and grandsons, daughters and flocks, a tapestry of life, moving toward a destiny no human hand could have planned. And then came the day long dreamed of, long prayed for, long wept for. Joseph rode out in his chariot to meet his father, his garments gleaming, his heart pounding like the hooves of the horses. The fields shimmered in the golden light as the chariot raced forward, leaving a trail of dust in its wake. Ahead, he saw the caravan halting, figures descending from wagons, and among them, bent with years yet unmistakable, was Jacob. Joseph leapt from the chariot before it even stilled. He ran like a child, like the boy he once was, across the open ground. His father's eyes lifted, and in them shone the reflection of a son he thought lost forever. They met at last, and Joseph fell upon his father's neck and wept a weeping that seemed to wash away every ache of absence, every scar of sorrow. And Jacob clung to him, his arms frail yet fierce with love, and for a long time they said nothing, for words were too small for such a moment. At last Jacob spoke, his voice thick with tears. "Now I am ready to die, since I have seen for myself that you are still alive." But Joseph held him fast, unwilling to let go, for life was sweet again, and death could wait. From that day, Jacob and all his household dwelt in the land of Goshen, a fertile stretch by the Nile, where pastures lay green and abundant. Pharaoh himself welcomed them, granting favor for Joseph's sake. The family flourished, roots sinking deep into the soil of Egypt, branches spreading wide. And through it all, Joseph's heart stayed humble. His eyes lifted to the one who had guided his steps from pit to palace, from grief to glory. Years rolled on, seasons turned, and when at last Jacob's time came, Joseph stood by his bed, his hand steady, his heart tender. And later, when his brothers feared vengeance after their father's death, Joseph spoke words that gleamed like sunlight through parted clouds. "You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good, to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives." So Joseph lived in peace, his life a hymn of grace, his story a testament to the quiet, unshakable purposes of God. A melody woven from threads of sorrow and joy, betrayal and blessing, loss and love, until every note rang with the harmony of redemption. As we come to the end of this beautiful story, let us pause for a quiet moment. We have walked with Joseph through valleys of sorrow and stood with him in places of great honor. We have seen how every twist in his life was held in the hands of a loving and faithful God. What others meant for harm, God used for good, to save many lives and to bring hope where there was none. Perhaps tonight, as you close your eyes, you carry questions, burdens, or uncertainties. Remember this truth: even when life feels uncertain, God's purpose is never lost. He sees the path ahead when we cannot. He holds every detail of your story with the same care that he held Joseph's life. Let your heart rest in that promise. You are not forgotten. You are deeply loved. As you drift into peaceful sleep, may you feel the nearness of God. May his comfort wrap around you like a warm blanket. May his peace settle over your thoughts like gentle evening rain. And may his blessing be upon your home and your loved ones tonight and always. Sleep well, dear friend. May tomorrow bring fresh grace and quiet joy. Good night, and God bless you. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, we thank you for your unchanging love. Just as you guided Joseph through every trial, guide us through our own paths with grace and wisdom. Tonight, we place every worry in your hands. Cover us with your peace, guard our hearts, and give us rest that renews our souls. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.